Fiona Green. Although she had a difficult childhood being the illegitimate daughter of an earl, this girl also had a knack for magic, which eventually allowed her to become a respected witch. Typical cliché for a protagonist, however, Fiona can never be the main character. The father turned to her and asked if she was listening to him at all. The girl immediately apologized to her father. Father didn't understand at all why she was such an impudent brat. Count Kane's eldest son turned to his father and said that he should not worry about such a non-entity. Fiona really wanted to punch him in the face. A creature as low as she was should stay put no matter how much she was irritated. Because even though Fiona was 10, she was just an illegitimate child, a burden to the Green family. That's right, now this child is our main character. She became Fiona Green. Although she is an illegitimate child, which puts her in a difficult situation in the future, she will become the genius witch Fiona. Despite this, she can't say that turning into Fiona is a good thing, and all because, even taking into account the bright future, Fiona is not the main heroine, but the main villain of this story. To make matters worse, she is the final boss who is supposed to die from the power of the main character's love. And she wants to give it up, she really wants to, but what is written on the first one cannot be cut out with an axe. This is a story about an emperor, the main hero and saint, and the main heroine, and how they fall in love and save the world. And in this world, there is no mercy for such a villain as Fiona. At the end, Fiona is transformed into something resembling a phoenix and threatens the main characters. The emperor uses the sword to remove Fiona's head and pierces the beating heart torn from its owner. After this, Fiona's head was hung on the castle gates and her body was burned to ashes. And Fiona's soul plunged into darkness, into lifelong, eternal suffering. This is what her future looks like as Fiona. It's unclear whether it would be better if she died now, but it's best to focus. They might hit her with the cane again if they thought she wasn't listening. I want to go on saying that he was sure everyone knew the war wasn't going well. He also noted that the imperial family had ordered a mage to be sent to the northern front line, meaning someone from their family. There are still 6 years until the finest hour. They are still at the point where the Empire is at a disadvantage due to losses in the fight against monsters. Even though this is a story where the male and female protagonists have to save the world from evil dragons and monsters, right now, reality has hit Fiona. Father said that one of them should go to the northern front line. The boy was simply horrified that his father was saying that they should participate in the war. The girl sighed. The Green family is one of the 7 mages of the Empire. So yes, it goes without saying that the palace is asking for their support. The problem is that it is unclear which of them will go to war. It was even interesting whether any of his children wanted to take part in such a glorious feat. The older brother pushed her. It hurt, but he just smiled. Here, everyone except her is the Countess's child, and probably everyone wants her, a worthless bastard, to go to war, even if he is just a child barely 13 years old. Fiona's older brother said it was just wonderful their little sister was ready to go, although it seems she can't say it out loud because she's shy. He pulled her by the hand. The girl tried to say at least something, but this bastard just kept smiling. Father said he understood that she wanted to go. It seems like their words match. It was probably planned, and the girl said it was a nice position that would put the family in a good light. She should be grateful that she, a lowly person, was given such an opportunity. Her sister also believed that Kane Dell should be the successor, and she would soon be married, and Jane's third brother would also soon be engaged. Because of this, she has to go to war. Fiona was angry he didn't even teach her magic, since she said that a bastard has no rights. He always locked her in the attic and tormented her every day. Although she knows the basics of magic, so everything is not so bad. Fiona tried to say something, but everyone was looking at her very intently. That's right. From the very beginning, there was no choice. The estate has no one on her side. Only one line was dedicated to revealing the past of Fiona, who was not even the main character. As an illegitimate child, she grew up receiving nothing but abuse from her family. The brothers said that it was time for them to leave. Even if she destroyed her family, it would still end up in the same way, so it was better to leave herself if she had to do it. Her father said that she made the right choice, and he was proud of her. Finally, she was acting like his child. It was suspicious of us on their part to invite her to a family gathering when they didn't consider her a human being and kept her locked up in the attic. Fiona hadn't felt this way since she first found out what was in this body a year ago. It can't believe that Fiona, the main villain who is in the same position as she, felt the same way. Fiona was upset with the world because she never received love. And in the end, she ended up in a swamp because of an irreversible choice. But unlike her, the main character is not going to be offended by anyone. It's all because this is the world that she wrote. Northern Halon Frontline. When Fiona arrived there, she now knew what the Duke of Halon's castle looked like. But when she arrived, she felt a lot of pressure. In the end, her family forced her to come to the Northern Frontline, ruled by a ruthless duke. Just by looking at him, it was clear that he was someone who could live in the Demon King's castle. And Fiona dug her own grave by coming here. She was brought to the huge doors, and the master asked the servants to open them. The door was so big that the girl was simply delighted. She was shocked when the door opened, and there she saw a man with silver hair. It was the Duke of the North, Abel Halon. He heard that a genius mage was coming. Let's show support. But he doesn't understand who this skinny child is standing in front of him. Abel Halon. In the future, he will become the mentor of Seagrin, the main character. As the hero's supporter, he was quite a popular character with readers. If trouble happens, he will help the main character. Even though he's much younger now than when he appeared in the original story, Fiona would dare say he's still quite the wild character. She introduced herself, and then the gentleman asked Geron what was going on here. Geron said this because Count Green said he would send a great magician of his blood. The Duke asked with a shout whether he wanted to say that he had sent this trifle in his place. The Duke realized what the stupid bastard thought of them. When this damn important war is over, the first thing he'll do is make the Green family pay for it. Then the girl Fiona realized that they were definitely finished. The ruthless Count of the North was very angry. Well, you shouldn't think like that at all. She has more serious problems now than the Green family. She already really wanted the Duke and his services to stop looking at her like that. When the Duke stood up, she was very scared. She looked at him completely perplexed. The Duke came closer and asked her to listen to him carefully. He asked for an explanation as to why Count Green had sent a child like her. He can't believe the Green family doesn't have more talent. The first brother is the head of the family, the sister is getting married soon, and her second brother is engaged. So she, the youngest child, was sent here, in their place. The Duke sighed and realized that these idiots really were taking war lightly. More or less, he doesn't understand, but still it's not respect for him. She must have already decided, but they don't want children here. Therefore, she must return home, and this was the Duke's final decision. He said he had no time for useless people. She doesn't know what about Abel, but she has no place to return to. In the original novel, Fiona was unaware of her magical abilities and was kicked out of the Green and Halon estate. Early on, the world throwing her away became the reason Fiona became a villain. Well then, the current Fiona knows everything in advance. This body has extraordinary abilities, so she decided to install the Duke. She said that she really had something to tell him. She said she could not carry out this order. Magicians are treated well everywhere instead of ending up on the street. It is better to prove your abilities by laying the foundation of a relationship. And in any case, the situation will begin to change after this as the main character appears in the war. If she can survive until then and collect enough money, she will be able to escape the death mark and move into the countryside. The girl said that she didn't want to go back at all, but she wouldn't stubbornly ask him to leave her either. So Fiona decided to ask him for one chance to prove her worth. He was a little hesitant and then assumed that she was going to take over the cleaning. But she said that this was not at all the case, and she was asking permission only once to go out onto the battlefield as best she could, and she would show that she could be useful in this war. The Duke was very surprised by Fiona's determination. Fiona didn't quite understand what was wrong with the atmosphere and why there was so much silence. She didn't understand why this was so, and assumed that he thought she was just talking nonsense and that she was an impudent child. But she hoped until the end that he wouldn't tell her that. After a rather long silence, the Duke finally approached her. Abel decided to agree to this adventure. This is the funniest thing he has heard in a long time. This kid has some good jokes. But Fiona didn't understand what he was talking about because she was actually serious. Abel said that he agreed and he would give her one chance. She can go ahead and prove her worth, Geron said he was back. Abel decided to ask about the child from Green County. Geron said that he took the girl into the room. The Duke smiled and said that her impudence and self-confidence were simply indescribable. She says she'll be useful, but the Duke also wonders what Geron thinks about it. The guy said that compared to her peers, she is very straightforward. When they came to her room, Fiona immediately said that it was different from the attic. But after all, she was still a child, and they were surprised that the Count actually sent her to fight. The Duke said that in 2 days he would send her to the second wall. Jaren was simply terrified. The second wall is full of demons and it is a very dangerous place. But the Duke told him not to worry, because Abel intended to go with her. The guy was surprised, and the gentleman said that he would really go, but if she is useless, he will personally feed her to the demons. Fiona lay down on the sofa and breathed in easily. To be honest, the pressure was unbelievable. Fiona is afraid of the guy she created. It was really pathetic. The main character is not quite sure what to think about the war, so she decided to put everything off until later. Today was so tiring, Fiona has no more strength. As they were leaving in the carriage, the Duke rode up and addressed Fiona. Abel noted that it was time for her to back up her words. That's how he spoke. Even though he is a character created by the main character, his appearance is the only thing he has. Fiona simply said that she understood him, and Abel asked with a smile if she was scared. Fiona hung her head and said there was nothing to be afraid of. To be honest, Fiona can't be calm. She is the one who once lived in the 21st century. Now she will fight demons. However, she has no choice considering Fiona's future. The Duke has said that he will not protect her. This means she could die, but Fiona just said it wasn't a problem. All because she is not afraid of death. The most terrible thing for her is a future without hopes and dreams. No matter how she dies later, it will be better than suffering. But she does not understand why she had to end up in Fiona's body. The second wall reported that demons were attacking. All battalions were ordered to take up positions. Fiona thought it was just a joke, but Abel smiled and said that it was just by chance that they arrived at just the right time. So she has to go and prove her worth. In this situation, she has to impress and give it her all. But Fiona didn't understand at all how she could do this because the demons were already approaching. Fiona said she would climb the ramparts. Since this is her first time here, she needs to understand what the battlefield looks like. Although she had read about it, seeing the carnage with her own eyes was something else entirely. But she was simply shocked when she saw everything with her own eyes. The Duke asked her what her first impression of the battlefield was. She heard people screaming that they needed to be burned so they wouldn't be able to regenerate. It was horrible. Fiona thought she was horrible for creating that scene. She really didn't want things to be this way. The Duke believed that she was so afraid that she could not move. He also noted that if she realized that her visit was a mistake, she could return. But she refused because she decided that since she created this chaos, she should be responsible for it. That's why she shouted that it was all about to start. The criteria by which a mage's level is determined are the amount of mana he possesses, how large a phenomenon he can create, and finally his effectiveness. She feels a weak flow of mana. It is the first time she uses such strong magic in Fiona's body. The only thing she can believe in now is her crazy talent. The Duke noticed the storm and also noted that it seemed to be a little different. What she wants to create is quite complex. But it seems she succeeded because she finally exhaled. Abel smiled and remarked that it was amazing, but suddenly she noticed something strange. The Duke remarked that it was like divine punishment. This is his first time seeing a mage with 2 skills, and he's not sure if she's really a child. But the girl confirmed it, but she will become the final boss in the future. The Duke was sure that the child was fundamentally, it seems like everything will collapse if he takes even one more step. She didn't want to believe that he was going to leave her because it wasn't enough, but he told her to just watch the demons retreat. The girl was shocked and noticed that these demons were indeed retreating. It felt like she had achieved something for the first time since she came into this world. But suddenly she sighed. She felt for some reason the townspeople were looking at her. She even felt a little embarrassed when she saw so many glances on her. She smiled, feeling awkward doing this while being held in his arms. Everyone started shouting that she was a wonderful magician and were delighted. They had already started thanking the girl, which made Fiona smile. She hoped she had done well and turned to the Duke with a smile. Here he also smiled in response and lowered her to the floor, after which Abel welcomed her to Hylon because she was accepted. He acknowledged her, so she started smiling and saying that it was really an honor for her. He just called her Fiona. He called her by her first name, as she thought he called her child or even baby, even though he knew her name. But she will show him yet a month later. All the servants were simply delighted with Mrs. Fiona. They always prepared a lot of sweets for her, and the girl was also delighted. The servants know her as a brilliant young lady magician. It seems that the episode when she caused lightning in the castle made a deep impression, and the possibility that there are no more children in this place, they all take care of Fiona so beautifully. Even Abel says that she is too small for 10 years old, so they order to feed her and bring the girl back to normal. It was a special order that he gave. Thanks to this, her pockets are filled with goodies, and she is very happy. Suddenly she noticed Jaron. She was surprised when she saw him. Judging by the fact that he looks like a zombie, he was just beaten up by Abel. She turned to him and said that she had some candy for him. The guy smiled and thanked her, and she also asked where he was going. Jaron replied that he was going to the 4th fortress wall. He heard that they were suddenly attacked this morning. The demons persistently attack day and night. It can be said that the situation on the 2nd wall, which she is responsible for, has improved somewhat in other places. It is quite weak. Just think that this was repeated for 6 long years until the main plot began. Since the situation was still uncertain, Fiona said that she would go with him. The guy was very surprised that she was going to go with him. He wasn't sure she could handle it, but the girl said it wouldn't be a problem. Jaron remembers one time when she was scared when she saw a demon's corpse. The difference between the view from the fortress wall and the view from close up was too great, so she was scared. After that she always went with Abel. Jaron said that he could then keep this one and not the Duke's, because for some reason she hates it when someone hangs out with her, but that's great, and they can go now. The 4th fortress wall looked simply awful. The commander was critically short of people. It's just some kind of curse, it's not clear. When will reinforcements arrive? They say that Lady Fiona of the Green family is already on her way here. When they arrived, the man had already prepared a whole report. He said that they are currently counting the victims of today's attack. Jaron asked him about the extent of the damage so that he could at least somehow understand the whole picture. The girl meanwhile looked and saw that sparks were flying in all directions. The smell of burning flesh permeated the air. Now she somehow got used to this terrible scene. They were also provided with all the tools that they were completely lacking. From this situation, Fiona cannot calmly stay near Jaron. Everyone was shocked when they saw that the magician went somewhere. She said she wanted to burn the bodies. First, she needs to concentrate and feel the flow of mana. She said that she would take care of that area, so there was no need to worry. They burned the corpses of demons, burned them, and burned them some more. Fiona didn't understand at all why there were so many of them. There was no end to them. She decided to take a look. Then she needed to burn the next demons. There she saw a boy lying with the corpses of demons. She assumed he was about her age. Judging by his clothes, he is not a soldier. Perhaps he is just a mercenary. She has the mind of an adult in a child's body, so it doesn't matter much if she dies. But for this guy, it would be different. Well, suddenly he started breathing and she got scared. She was like, he's a zombie, even corpses can talk here. It was really some kind of fantasy to me, so she was scared because of it. But she said that she understood that this was still a child, so she could free him. She started screaming that they had a survivor. He had a wound near his stomach. She decided it would be better to turn him over so that it wouldn't hurt him so much. When she turned him over, he looked a little better, and he opened his eyes, which means he is conscious. She asked if he was listening to her. They are safe now, so there is no need to worry. She asked him not to turn off, but the guy just asked the bunny who she was. They will start, and that's an achievement. He's conscious, so he has a chance to survive if she gets him to a doctor immediately. But if you look closely, this guy has an attractive face. He would be handsome if he were healthy. But what he is doing here is completely unclear. Besides, despite the fact that she has never seen him before, he seems familiar to her. The boy suddenly noticed that a huge shadow had appeared right behind the girl. His gaze froze on the monster with terrible claws and burning eyes. In horror, he felt his heart squeeze with fear. He immediately shouted that it was very dangerous, but his voice was mixed with the panicked noise of the crowd. The men seeing the monster began to shout, ordering people to run immediately. Fiona didn't immediately understand what had happened, and only after a moment did she feel the tense gazes around her. Only then did she slowly turn her head, trying to figure out what had scared everyone so much. But before she could even see what was happening, her arm was grabbed. Someone's strong but trembling hand jerked her back, saving her from imminent disaster. It was the same boy she had seen before. He looked wounded, but somehow he found the strength to protect her. Such an act was unexpected and simply amazing. People immediately ran up to Fiona, asking with concern if she was hurt, while they themselves tried to somehow stop the monster that was threatening everyone around. Someone had warned her to be ready. The giant who had not been caught had clearly targeted her. He was breathing heavily, looming over her, ready to strike. If the boy hadn't managed to push her aside, she would have been lying lifeless in this very spot. The thought of it made her heart freeze in horror. She thought for a moment that the boy was dead, but when she looked at him more closely, she noticed that he was still breathing. He was alive, although badly wounded. Fiona didn't know what to do. His injuries seemed to have gotten worse after he rolled awkwardly onto his arm. Every move he made her feel scared. She couldn't just run away while he was lying there, but the giant had already raised his hand for another blow, and she knew that she couldn't dodge in this position. The monster was preparing to attack again. The men watching looked horrified because they knew that this time the blows would be fatal. The giant moved with purpose, as if his only goal was Fiona and the boy. He seemed oblivious to anyone else around him. People were screaming for her to do something. Everyone knew that the lady had magic and now was their only chance to stop the beast. Then, gathering all her strength, Fiona decided to use magic. She was scared, but there was no other way out. She had to at least try to push him away. Her spell worked. The giant staggered back, then collapsed. He did not move again. He was finished, and a tense silence fell over the battlefield. Fiona knew that the amount of magic used could hurt her, but for now it didn't matter. The main thing was that they were alive. Compared to the monster, she was fine. Yes, her strength was running out, but at least she hadn't passed out, and that was good. People surrounded her again, their faces filled with worry. They asked how she was feeling. Fiona smiled weakly and replied that she was feeling better. Suddenly, the boy went limp in her arms, unconscious. Fiona looked at his face in fear, and in that moment it seemed to dawn on her. She realized who he was. Details floated into her mind. His clothes weren't like the mercenaries, and his hair was as dark as the night sky. Something about that combination made her think. Turquoise-gray eyes, distinctive features that stood out even through the dirt and blood. At first, she didn't recognize him. He looked younger than expected. But now there is no doubt this guy is the same Seagrin, the main character. There are still 6 years before the events of the original story, and Fiona can't understand why this boy is lying right in front of her, wounded and helpless, as if fate decided to speed things up. This is the moment he first met Abel, but now is not the time to dwell on that. There are more important things than dwelling on the future. If he really is the hero destined to save this world, then his death right now could mean the end of it, which means she would be the one who doomed everyone. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Fiona doesn't waste a second and starts screaming, demanding that someone call a doctor immediately before it's too late. 2 days passed, and the boy finally came to his senses. He was still weak, but he could lie in bed instead of hovering between life and death. Although his injuries were serious, fortunately the worst was avoided. The crisis has passed, and now all that remains is to wait for his full recovery. The doctor examined the patient and confidently declared that his condition was now stable. These words made Fiona happy, and she felt an incredible relief. The doctor also warned that if anything happened, he should be called immediately. Fiona promised that she would do so and said goodbye to him. She was filled with joy and relief. All this time she was afraid that something irreparable would happen, but now she could breathe a sigh of relief. After all, if the predictions are to be believed, they have just prevented the end of the world. And that is, without a doubt, a very good result. Although, if you think about it, she's unlikely to be praised. If it turns out that this boy really is a hero, her role in the story looks suspicious. Seagrin is now about 14 years old. At least that's how he should be given how the original story unfolds. His backstory isn't fully described in the book, but Fiona has thought through the key details well to better understand who she's dealing with. Like most of the main characters, his origins are shrouded in mystery. He is the prince of the very empire she is currently in. True, his origin is unofficial. In fact, he is an illegitimate child, which they prefer not to talk about. His mother was a commoner and despised, constantly humiliated as if her existence were a mistake. Many people hated Seagrin, considering him unnecessary in this world. They wished him dead and dreamed of getting rid of him forever. Since childhood, he had lived in constant danger. Every day could be his last, and he knew it better than anyone. His mother knew they couldn't survive here. To save him, she decided to flee to another country, hoping to find protection there. But they were being looked for too carefully. A woman with a child hiding from everyone were like targets. They couldn't just let them go. The mother with trembling hands hid her son in a secluded place, whispering some words in his ear. But the boy was too young to understand what exactly she was talking about. There was alarm in her voice, but he could not understand how serious everything was. She smiled, though her eyes were shining with tears. She stroked her son's head and told him that everything would be fine. They would definitely meet later. She hugged him tightly as if trying to convey all her love in one last hug. But the promise turned out to be a lie. She was never able to escape. Fate was merciless. She was caught and died, leaving her son alone in this cruel world. However, those who hunted her did not stop. They knew that she had a son, and now they were looking for him. After all, if the mother tried to escape, then the boy must be somewhere nearby hiding from the pursuers. When he finally emerged from hiding, his gaze fell on his mother's nearly lifeless body. In a weak voice, she told him to run as far as he could without looking back. These were her last words, full of despair and love. He cried, trying to wake her, but it was all in vain. In an instant he was left completely alone, young, helpless, broken. The world, which was already cruel, now took everything that was dear to him. Seeing no other way out, the boy gathered the rest of his strength and went to Hylon, the cold lands of the far north, hoping that no one would find him there. This choice was not accidental. Hylon was on the edge of the empire, out of reach of those who wanted him dead. It was the only place where he could hide, escape his past, and perhaps start a new life. Later, Abel learns of his fate. He notices that Seagrin wields a sword and decides to take him on as an apprentice. This is how the story of the boy's childhood ends, about the trials that tempered his soul and made him who he became. At the same time, the short story he told the main character will also end. After all, the past is just the foundation on which personality is built, something that shapes us but does not define us definitively. Moreover, his story is not just a part of a fantasy world. It is a real tragedy that once happened to a living person. He survived, but the price was too high. He went through suffering, loss, betrayal. All of this left scars not only on his body but also on his heart, making him who he is today. The main character really feels sorry for him. Although she thought that she would leave this place one day, at this moment, she felt differently. But even if she decides to leave, she needs to treat him with respect now. After all, in the future, he will be the one to take her life. Fiona decided that she should befriend the boy just in case she knew that her little sister would genuinely care for him, which meant that he should grow up to be a good person, although in reality, she just wanted him to leave her alone. She was so worried about Seagrin that she barely slept, and now fatigue covered her head. So she decided to take a little break. She would close her eyes for just a minute next to him and think about everything else later when he finally came to his senses. But suddenly, Fiona woke up, her heart pounding in her chest and a wave of anxiety running through her body. Something had woken her up and she didn't understand what it was. She tried to remember how much time had passed since she dozed off, but nothing came to mind. Her thoughts were confused. Feeling someone's gaze, she slowly turned her head. Something was strange, but she didn't immediately understand what it was. Seagrin wasn't sleeping. He just looked at her and then asked her if she had slept well. That's how they met. Although it was a little awkward. Fiona was amazed. When he opened his eyes, his beauty struck her. Those dark, deep eyes suited him, giving him a certain mystery. Perhaps it was his age, but he reminded her of an angry cat. Something in his gaze was intense, prickly, as if he wasn't used to trusting people. She thought he would be more calm, since he was the main character in this story, but in reality his wariness was obvious. He was silent for a while, and then finally asked the first question. His voice was quiet, but firm. He wanted to know where he was. Fiona calmly replied that he was in Hylon Castle. After that, the guy frowned and asked who she was. The girl, without thinking, introduced herself. In response, he also said his name. His voice sounded even, but his gaze remained wary. He tried to figure out how he was still alive. His memory was blank, no memory of him falling with her. He only knew that he had woken up here, but what had happened in between was a mystery. Even in his unconscious state, he managed to help her. A true hero always puts others before himself, even if he doesn't realize it. And this isn't the first time Fiona has noticed that he is like that. She calmly explained that she had brought him here herself and asked the doctor to take care of him. The boy looked stunned. He stared at her incredulously and asked again, as if he couldn't believe what he had heard. He could make a dissatisfied face as much as he wanted, but she was worried about something else. His condition. Yes, he looks like the main character of this story, but in the end, he is just a child, even if he tries to seem stronger. Her expectations and reality have diverged too much. What he went through is not just a bad past, it is a terrible real experience. Guilt overwhelms her because she now sees the consequences with her own eyes. Why did the main character have to suffer so much? She couldn't understand it. But putting all emotions aside, she asked, "Does he have a temperature?" It was important for her to know that he was okay. In response, the guy abruptly pulled his hand away and said harshly that she should not touch him whenever she wanted. There was irritation in his voice, and his gaze was displeased. Fiona didn't back down and asked him to tell her honestly if he was in pain, but he only coldly replied that he would take care of himself, and brooking no argument ordered her to leave. She touched him again. The boy flushed with rage. His voice became louder, almost shouting. He was angry, but his anger seemed to be something more than just irritation. No matter how hard he tries to hold on, a 14-year-old is still a child. Everyone has a limit, even those who want to appear unshakable. The boy looked at the woman in front of him in horror, not understanding what was happening. His voice trembled with fear as he asked who she was and what all this meant. Fiona calmly replied that he was under intensive treatment, and if he was in any pain or getting worse, he should let her know immediately. However, the young man was confused. Why would she even care about him if they had just met? It all seemed ridiculous and suspicious to him. He also noticed that the situation was extremely strange, but Fiona only reminded him that he was the one who saved her, and that is why she is now taking care of him. Seagrin asked her in shock, insisting that he would never do such a thing. He did not understand what salvation she was talking about. At that moment, the door suddenly swung open and a tall man walked in. The conversation immediately stopped, tension hung in the air. Seagrin froze in shock, not knowing who was in front of him. Fiona also looked surprised, clearly not expecting the intruder to appear. Abel angrily told Fiona that it was too early for her to bring men home, especially when there was a child in the house. Fiona immediately objected that this was not a man but only a boy. However, the Duke only chuckled, considering it to be the same thing. He was clearly in a bad mood, so Fiona decided not to argue or make the situation worse, trying to smooth out the tension that had arisen. She asked what brought him here, but the Duke only irritably said that this boy was to blame for everything, calling him a brat. There was a clear hint in his words that the appearance of this child had somehow changed the balance in the house, as if disrupting its usual order. Fiona raised her eyebrows in surprise, realizing that he was hinting at her. However, despite the Duke's displeasure, she firmly stated that the boy would remain in her room because his wounds were serious. Duke Halen looked closely at the boy he was seeing for the first time. His clothes and manners indicated that he was a stranger. He was clearly not from here, and the Duke decided to find out where he was from. The Duke's words made Fiona think, indeed, she had never asked Seagrin who he worked for. It had simply never occurred to her. But the boy himself answered without hesitation. He belonged to Carl's mercenary unit, and judging by his tone, he saw nothing strange in this. The Duke frowned. He asked again, surprised that Charles would stoop to hiring such children. Were things really that bad for the mercenaries that they needed teenagers? But it was a question that could not be discussed openly. Fiona only smiled, pretending that this conversation did not concern her. Seagrin didn't answer. Silence fell between them, and for a while no one spoke. The atmosphere grew more and more tense. Then Fiona decided to ease the tension. She walked up to Seagrin and quietly said that Duke Abel Halon himself stood before him. Hearing this name, Seagrin became wary. He knew who the Duke was, and the first thought that came to his mind was that perhaps he would want to kill him. The girl reached out to him, but he jerked away as if her touch had burned him. He left the maternity hospital and told her not to do that again. But Fiona just shrugged. She wasn't trying to hurt him. She was just telling him not to worry. Fiona seemed so taken with this boy that even her persistence seemed funny. She clearly wasn't going to back down, and even her stubbornness seemed more cute than annoying. The Duke frowned and told the girl to stay away from the child. In his opinion, it was too early to think about such things, but Fiona was not going to give in so easily, and repeated again that this guy was just a child. Not wanting to continue this argument, the Duke simply picked her up and walked away confidently. Lately, he had been carrying her more and more often as if it had become a habit for him. The maids watched them with admiration. They looked like father and daughter to them. Fiona was used to hearing such remarks because the Duke picked her up so often that it ceased to surprise her. They both had silver hair, so those around them couldn't help but notice the resemblance. Fiona suddenly remembered the boy and asked if he could stay here until he was fully recovered. The Duke was surprised to note that this was the first time the girl had asked for something like this. It was so unexpected that he even thought about it for a moment. Fiona honestly admitted that she rarely needed anything, but this time was an exception. The Duke reluctantly agreed, although he did not like the request. However, he would give the boy a room so that he could recover in peace. She was literally glowing with joy. But the Duke suddenly looked at her intently and asked if she really wanted to be under the same roof with this stranger. Seagrin only frowned and asked with a grin what was wrong with her. He did not understand why this wealthy young lady was so persistently interfering in his fate. Although they had only just met, he already felt hostility towards her. Something about her irritated him, but he himself could not say exactly what it was. Fiona certainly hadn't grown up in luxury, but she saw no point in explaining that to Seagrin. All he needed now was to get better and grow strong. Nothing else mattered. Over time, he will have to not only become attached to the main character, but also truly fall in love with her. His feelings will become not only his personal story, but also part of the salvation of this world. Fiona, as a loving mother, will watch this with warmth and care. She is always there. Her attention does not weaken, even when her own affairs require time and energy. In any case, she feels grateful to the Duke because without him, many things could have turned out differently. So Fiona decides to work even harder, not wanting to be a burden. The Duke seemed to be the same as before, reserved, a little stern. And yet there was something new in his words, a softness that had been hidden before. It confused her because she didn't know if it meant kindness or just a change in mood, but most of all, she wanted to believe that he wouldn't send her away. The Duke noticed her uneasiness and asked what she was thinking, but Fiona only sighed. People really are complicated, and it can be hard to figure out their intentions. The boy lying in his bed remembered his mother's words. She always told him that he had to survive no matter what happened, and those words were deeply imprinted in his memory. Kalia, his dear mother, worried about him until the very end. Even in her last days, she thought only about him staying alive. As she died, her voice was weak, but she still managed to tell him that he had to live, and even then she found the strength to touch him. Those words were etched into his mind like a brand. He couldn't forget how he sat next to her, feeling her life slip away, but unable to change anything. Later, he found himself in a place where he was safe. He knew it was his mother's last wish fulfilled, but it didn't make the emptiness in his heart any less. Now that his life was no longer in danger, he no longer had to think about survival, but this realization brought no relief, only the weight of memories. He was allowed to do the simplest work in the mercenary unit, sweeping floors, carrying water, cleaning dishes. It was humiliating, but at least it kept him from starving to death. One day, one of the mercenaries shouted to him, but he couldn't come up to him right away because he was finishing washing the floor. He knew that he could be punished for being slow, but he still didn't throw down the rag. The man who called him chuckled irritably and called him a puppy, said that his words should not be an empty sound for someone who eats their bread and lives under their roof. Then he grabbed the guy by the collar and jerked him sharply, forcing him to look him in the eyes. He reminded him that if it weren't for them, he would have died of hunger long ago, and therefore he was obliged to obey. After that, the man roughly pushed him to the floor and warned him not to stand in his way. There was no malice in his voice, only weariness, as if he was talking about unnecessary garbage. The mercenaries often beat him for no reason, maybe out of boredom, maybe just to show who was boss. Soon his body was covered in bruises and scars. But despite everything, he didn't give up. He had to survive. His mother had asked him to do so when she left. Her voice still sounded in his head, not letting him give up. But he constantly heard that he was useless, worthless, good for nothing. These words sounded even more often than his name cutting into his consciousness like a brand. And one day he thought, why should he survive at all? Since no one needs him, maybe it would be easier to just disappear? He felt lonely, often wishing that someone would show him even a little bit of care, but there was none in his life. He felt like his existence was losing all meaning. From time to time he wondered if his miserable existence had any value, if it was worth fighting for. Feelings of helplessness never left him. Over time, mercenaries became the main source of protection for Highland's holdings. Fights with monsters, although dangerous, brought good money, giving the opportunity to survive. He didn't get a good weapon, so he was forced to use a sword he picked up by chance on the battlefield. It looked strange, but there was no other way. However, the only positive thing about these battles was that every time he risked his life, he became stronger, developing his skills in combat. He survived, but life, as it turned out, was not so easy. Things did not go as smoothly as he imagined, and he had to face new difficulties. At some point, they were forced to retreat because the enemy was too strong. The situation became increasingly dangerous, and they had to look for ways to escape. One of the men shouted at him to go away, calling him a slowpoke, and made him run. These were angry words, but he could do nothing in response. The same man pushed him, telling him that if he couldn't be useful, then he should die. This attitude hurt him deeply, but he knew that it was only the beginning. He was asked to become a human shield, and although it was humiliating, he knew there was no other way. They left him thinking he would be okay, but he wasn't sure. The words of his mother, who always told him that he had to live no matter what suddenly came into his head, these words became his support in moments when everything seemed hopeless. When the monsters started attacking him, he was in a state of shock. Everything that was happening seemed unreal, and he did not know how to cope with this situation. He couldn't stop. Couldn't allow himself to give up, even though he knew that despite his improved fighting skills, it wasn't enough to survive. He raised his weapon, preparing for the final battle, and thought that perhaps death was what awaited him. In a way, it even calmed him. He couldn't help but think that of all the reasons he had been destined to leave this life, this was the most unfair. The people who had betrayed him were the cause of his fear and pain. If he was going to die for someone, he sincerely hoped it would be for someone who would be worthy of such a sacrifice, for a person who would be just like him. He longed to save someone he could support, because no one had given him a helping hand when he was in the greatest need. This left deep marks on his soul, and that's why he wanted to help someone so much without asking for anything in return. His ideal was that others perhaps would live better than he managed to do, so that everything would not be in vain. He felt everything slipping away. He knew that such thoughts were the ones that would lead to his death, but he was ready for it. The only thing he wanted was for his hope not to be in vain. He believed that somewhere out there in this world there was a light that could illuminate the way. Or perhaps he himself would become that light for someone who wanted to believe in the best. It was impossible now. He was too weak to even hope for a miracle. However, the thought of a bright future did not leave him leaving a mark on his soul. Suddenly, as if from the darkness itself, someone began to gently stroke his hair. It was so unexpected and warm that he felt his heart beat a little faster. The touch was so gentle that his eyes filled with tears on their own. He closed his eyes, trying to get rid of the pain and worries that tormented his soul. He didn't know where he was. Everything seemed vague and strange. But when his gaze fell on the girl next to him, everything seemed less important. She was there, and that was comforting. He was shocked to see an unfamiliar girl. He couldn't understand how she was there, but her presence at some point gave him a sense of peace that he hadn't known for so long. It was the most amazingly peaceful sight he had ever seen in his life. All his tired days and worries disappeared for a moment, leaving only the silence and the feeling of peace from this girl. Fiona asked him how his wound was doing and offered to examine it, but he quickly pulled his hand away, not wanting her to touch him. He didn't want her concern. He repeated again that he didn't want her to touch him whenever she wanted. He had said this before, and his words hadn't changed. She couldn't understand his insistence. All she could do was try to call. But was it really that hard to understand that he found it unpleasant to be the center of attention? She barely had time to write down his name. There was no talk of intimacy. If he was in pain, he should tell the doctor, but he didn't want her to see him in pain. Fiona pointed out that he should have known for himself when to ask for help, but the boy said that she was being too strange in her behavior. The girl was taken aback and asked him again why he perceived her that way. He looked at her as if she were something strange that she could not understand. His words puzzled her. He wondered why she cared so much about him. This was sympathy from a girl who had never faced real-life problems. Why was she reacting like that? He even joked that perhaps for her, he was like an abandoned dog or cat that needed to be taken care of. He couldn't understand her compassion, but the girl didn't agree with this. She said it wasn't true that her concern had nothing to do with pity. Seagrin seemed to think she was close to Abel. This meant that he saw in her a noble and protected line, one that did not know the harsh life, and this is what angered him. He did not want to depend on such a girl. She noted that she did not have such low intentions, but the guy in turn could not understand why she behaved this way if this was not so. Of course, she believed that a close relationship with him could be useful in the future, but that was only one side of her motives. However, more important to her was her affection for the man named Seagrin. His presence touched something in her soul, and she could not ignore it. The problem was that she couldn't just act on the fact that she wanted to help him. There was something bigger that was nagging at her. He also noticed that saving a person he had just met for no reason was a bit strange. He didn't understand what was behind her actions. She replied that perhaps he had such thoughts, but the guy sharply said that this was not the case at all, and silence fell between them again. He was sure that only people like her, rich and spoiled, could live with such naive thoughts, not understanding the complexities of life. He was starting to irritate her. She wasn't just a lady sitting on the sidelines either. She was in the fight, and now she asked him to listen to her. She wasn't just another lady who stayed on the sidelines. She had her own strength, her own opinion, and she was ready to fight for her views. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and when she opened it, she saw the doctor. The lady was very glad that he had come, and that her concerns were not being ignored. And today, Lady Fiona was here, which surprised him. As expected, she got along well with those around her, especially with her peers with whom she quickly found a common language. When the doctor decided to examine the boy, Seagrin said she could go since it didn't require her presence, but she was in no mood for it. But Fiona replied that she wanted to see how his wounds had healed. The boy with obvious displeasure said that she would be very lucky if she did not faint at the sight of it. The girl easily noted that she would try not to worry. She had seen many horrible corpses on the battlefield, so for her it was no worse than sweet candy. The guy in turn noted that he simply wanted her to go away. He could not calmly do the bandage if she continued to stay nearby. The girl still said that she would leave. She added that he was in principle at that age when everyone is embarrassed to undress in front of others, especially in front of women. Although, to be honest, if you think about it, his shyness could have been some kind of cute trait that spoke of his age and awkwardness in such situations. Deciding that she would return later, she smiled and took a step back. It seemed like a sensible decision to not disturb him, but to be mindful of the situation. The doctor, getting to the important point, asked Seagrin if he had felt any pain that night. This was an important point to understand how he was recovering. The guy calmly replied that there was no pain. Everything was fine, and he felt pretty good despite the recent events and injuries. Fiona had no idea that simply bandaging a wound would be such a long and tedious process. She tried to act carefully, but the bleeding just wouldn't stop, and the bandages kept trying to unwind. But Seagrin, unable to bear it, suddenly shouted that she was just an ignorant girl who knew nothing about real life. His words were full of anger, but Fiona was not going to interrupt this conversation, even if her soul was torn apart by contradictions. She works too. She tries her best, so she doesn't understand why Seagrin has such a fierce dislike for her. She hasn't done anything bad to him, but for some reason he treats her like his sworn enemy. Until now, she had never thought about what kind of child Seagrin was. Perhaps there was something in his past that would explain his behavior now, but she doesn't know these details, and that's why she can't understand him. In the original story, she knew Eunice was the star. Seagrin was a supporting character existing in the shadow of the main character without depth or complex feelings. He was the perfect man, caring, handsome, and infinitely devoted to Eunice. That's how the whole world saw him. The embodiment of a dream, the one every girl would want to see next to her. Those who always remained faithful to their beloved and supported her in any situation. Fiona was used to thinking about Seagrin exactly like that. But now that there was a completely different person in front of her, she didn't know how to feel about him. Perhaps she herself does not fully understand what drives her actions. Conflicting feelings are fighting deep inside. Guilt for past mistakes, a strange attachment to him, and the voice of reason that tells her that this boy can play an important role in her life. But he seems to perceive her behavior as something unnecessary. If she does something thoughtless, it could make him hate her, and that would mean her own future would be at risk. She cannot afford such a mistake. At that moment, the doctor came out to her. He immediately addressed the lady, and Fiona decided that the examination was already over. The doctor confirmed her guess, but his expression remained too serious. This made the girl wary. What if something bad happened? However, the doctor assured her that the boy's wounds were healing. Despite this, she still had a feeling of anxiety, as if the doctor was not telling her everything. He added that the child was once a mercenary, and now it is questionable whether they will be able to allow him to return to his former life, even after he is fully recovered. The boy didn't say anything about himself, but his body spoke for him. It was completely covered with old scars testifying to a difficult fate. Without listening to the doctor until the end, Fiona literally flew into the room where the wounded man lay, no longer able to contain her emotions. In a fit of emotion, she screamed at him. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It never occurred to her that things would be so bad. Now she didn't understand what she had done. And he didn't understand what had suddenly come over him. An awkward silence hung in the room. The girl came closer and sat down next to him on the bed. However, the boy was clearly not thrilled with such closeness. Fiona apologized quietly, her voice shaking. She gently touched his shoulder and warned him that she was going to lift his clothes a little to look. Seagrin froze in horror. His eyes darted around the room as if he were looking for a way out. He sharply asked her to stop, but the girl continued to beg for forgiveness. Panicked, he began to shout louder, demanding that she stop if he already knew this was wrong. But Fiona stubbornly replied that she only needed a minute. The skin beneath her fingers was uneven, covered in bumps and pits. She couldn't believe her eyes. The surface of the body was covered in marks. They were real scars. When she lifted his shirt higher, the sight before her took her breath away. It was horrible. They covered his body in a solid pattern, as if an invisible artist had painted his skin with pain. Fiona couldn't understand how this could happen. Seagrin's face contorted with rage. He shouted that he would not tolerate this any longer, and in a fit of irritation he pushed her away from him. Fiona didn't have time to react. She fell straight onto the cold floor, hitting her back painfully. The air whistled out of her lungs. He realized immediately that he had pushed her too hard. Fear flashed in his eyes. He hadn't meant to do this. He took a step toward her but froze. Watching her rise with difficulty, he asked in confusion if she was really made of feathers, since she fell so easily from his movement. Fiona simply stepped back without a word. Seagrin couldn't understand why she was so fragile, so light, as if she could be blown away with a single breath. Seagrin noticed Fiona's eyes fill with tears, and she began to sob softly. He hadn't expected such a reaction, and immediately felt alarmed. In a panic, he rushed towards her, looking at her face with concern. He bombarded her with questions, trying to understand if she was hurt, if someone had hurt her. Seeing her continue to cry, he felt helpless. He begged her to talk to him, to explain the reason for her tears, just so she would stop crying so much. He nervously asked where exactly it hurt. He assumed that perhaps she had hit her shoulder or injured her leg, and that was why she was feeling so bad. Without waiting for a clear answer, he came to the conclusion that a doctor was urgently needed. He said that this was not possible. They must call a doctor immediately. But suddenly Fiona grabbed him by the shirt, not letting him go. He froze, not understanding what she wanted to say and why she was holding him so desperately. The girl, sobbing, mumbled that she was okay. She wasn't hurt, she just couldn't hold back her tears. Before her eyes was Seagrin's mutilated skin. Scars covered his chest, arms, sides. Their appearance was frightening, like traces of many torments. These marks were not accidental. He was burned, deliberately subjected to cruel treatment over and over again. He knew that these wounds would remain with him forever. Each scar spoke of suffering of long years of pain. Fiona, shuddering, dared to ask who had left these marks on his body. The boy's face changed immediately. He withdrew, frowned, as if he had erected a wall between himself and the world around him in a second. He was sure that Fiona had learned the truth from the doctor. After all, he was the one who treated his wounds, so he could tell her about it. The girl did not deny it, and then Seagrin decided that it was precisely because of what she had heard that she was now crying, unable to bear the truth. After all, that was why he asked her not to come in while they were changing his bandages. He knew it would hurt her to see his wounds, and he was right. He was about to say that she always did that, but before he could, Fiona threw herself into his arms as if trying to ease the pain he was feeling. Seagrin smelled of medicine, and the smell only increased her pity. It was bitter to her to realize that he had endured such cruelty. She held him close, not letting go because of her, he had endured terrible torture. The thought of this did not give her peace. It all happened because of one sentence she accidentally said, in which she mentioned his unhappy childhood. The difference between what he had read in books and what he had experienced was so astonishing that Fiona couldn't understand how it had come to this. But the guy said it wasn't a big deal. There were a lot of rude people among the mercenaries, and he was singled out simply because he was the weakest. Fiona looked him in the eye and firmly told him that he shouldn't take it for granted because it wasn't fair. Seagrin assumed she was expressing sympathy, but her words sounded more like a reproach, as if he shouldn't take it so easily. To be honest, Fiona still didn't realize either Seagrin's existence or the reality of this world she found herself in. Even during the fierce battle, it seemed to her that all this was not happening to her, as if she was looking at the events from afar, as if they were someone else's fate. Or rather, she simply ignored reality, but when she saw his scars, she could no longer turn a blind eye to it. It was her fault. If it hadn't been for her, no one would have beaten Seagrin as a child. Now this realization weighed heavily on her heart. She complained that she couldn't get close to him, but now she understood that if he hated her, she would still stay close. Perhaps this is the only thing she can do to somehow atone for her guilt before him for those scars. She no longer had any doubts. Now she would always be by Seagrin's side to support him. This was the best way for her to apologize to him. So looking into his eyes, she quietly but firmly said that she was truly sorry. Hearing her words, the guy frowned and irritably said that she was behaving strangely. He did not understand why she was so persistently trying to make amends for her guilt when there was no guilt in his eyes. Now he was sure that she was simply trying to apologize for undressing him that day. It seemed ridiculous to him because he hadn't thought about it for a long time. However, the girl immediately shook her head and firmly objected that this was not the case at all. The reason for her words was much deeper than he could have guessed. She couldn't hold back her tears, and this only seemed to irritate Seagrin more. He frowned and told her to stop crying as if it hurt him to watch. He was sure that she was innocent, so he saw no point in her tears. No matter how the circumstances turned out, she shouldn't worry so much. Even when Seagrin spoke harshly, there was a softness in his movements. No matter how hard he tried to appear, he was still just a child with a soft side. The girl looked at him carefully, and without thinking carefully, took his face in her hands. She wanted him to feel the warmth of her hands. It was as if she was casting a spell at that moment, telling him not to hurt her again. Perhaps she was trying to protect him as well. She knew that even if her wounds healed, the scars on Seagrin's heart would remain forever. But despite this, she wanted to protect him as much as she could. Deep down, she hoped that her small wish would ease his guard. Maybe for a moment he would stop seeing her as a stranger. After all that was said, she smiled and suggested that they not fight. Let them at least try to live in peace even if friendship does not work out yet. Seagrin looked away and muttered that she was strange. First she cried, then she laughed. He couldn't understand her at all, but it seemed to bother him a little. He still said that she could do what she wanted. However, the slight blush on his cheeks betrayed his true feelings, even though he tried to hide them. Seeing his reaction, the girl began to suspect that he was not so against her proposal. Even if he did not say so, she felt that he was not pushing her away. Yes, she will become a good friend to him. Even if he himself does not realize it yet, she will be there and will do everything so that he does not feel lonely anymore. After that, she felt that her attitude towards Seagrin had changed and wanted to spend more time with him. She invited him to eat cookies together, hoping that it would help them get closer. Although she wasn't sure if she understood correctly, at least he didn't push her hands away or tell her not to touch him anymore. This already seemed like a small progress in their relationship. Given his history of abuse, it was only natural that he would be sensitive to physical contact. Even the slightest touch could feel threatening to him. But Fiona still thought that his reaction was not only due to the contact itself, but also because she accidentally saw his scars. Perhaps this was a particularly painful subject for him. She told him that his injury looked worse and warned him not to move, or the wound might reopen. Her voice was serious without any softness. However, Seagrin as usual assured her that everything was fine and that he was almost healthy. Fiona, however, did not believe his words and insisted that he needed to rest. Until he is fully recovered, he should not take any risks. He should at least listen to her words, since she is after all an older sister who cares for him. He wondered how old she was since she was so confident in calling herself the eldest. He tried to guess, but she seemed too small in appearance. She sighed in embarrassment because in fact she was a year younger than him, but in order not to lose her authority, she lied that she was already 13 years old. Seagrin was a little surprised. He had always thought she was younger, about 10 years old, and now his guesses were proven wrong. Fiona's temper flared when she heard this. Does he think she's a child too? Abel keeps saying she's little, but does she really look 10 years old? But what can you do? As a child, she lived in the attic and there was no food or proper heat there. Apparently, this affected her appearance. In any case, it is now clear that Seagrin is a year older than her, but she confidently stated that her psychological age is much greater than it appears. The boy thought, maybe the girl is wrong in thinking she is small. Apparently she is well fed, so why is she not growing at all? It was strange. The girl understood that it was not a matter of nutrition, but of her weak endurance. After using magic, she felt tired and could not repeat the spell. It was like running. You can start quickly, but you do not have enough strength for long distances. Looking at the boy seriously, she declared that from now on she would try her best to grow up. The boy nodded, noting that the main thing was not to stop and make an effort. Now that the boy's condition had improved and his mental balance had been restored, she felt a little better. The anxiety had subsided a little. His face seemed carved from ivory, so perfect. Even though he was her child, she looked forward to his future upbringing. She really wanted him to use his dazzling beauty and impress the Duchess. It might help him. The guy felt her gaze and couldn't help but think that there was something wrong with his face, but the girl immediately assured him that everything was fine. Seagrin couldn't hold back any longer and decided to ask him directly, why was Fiona looking at him so intently? The girl, without embarrassment, answered that he was simply handsome, but she immediately added that he should not forget his principles when he would date someone in the future. She warned that even if it was him, she would not forgive anyone who made her beloved heroine cry. Seagrin only nodded, acknowledging her words, and noted that he thought about it every day, but sometimes she says things that he didn't have time to finish, and Fiona, feeling that the meaning was slipping away, asked him again what exactly he wanted to say. Seagrin thought for a moment, and then admitted that sometimes he didn't understand whose psychological age was greater. Judging by her behavior, she doesn't realize how scary people can be, but Fiona just smirked and said that he was deeply mistaken because she was about to continue when Geron suddenly burst into the room. Interrupting their conversation, he loudly called out to the lady, hastily informing her that the huge monster was moving towards the second wall. Apparently, the entire military force had to gather urgently. Fiona, without wasting any time, said that she understood and promised to go there immediately. Geron nodded gratefully, but just as she was about to leave, Seagrin suddenly grabbed her arm, his voice worried as he asked what she was doing. He couldn't understand why she was going there at all, and he was basically right. After all, she never told him that she was a mage who had volunteered to participate in the war. Then Fiona decisively answered that she really was a battle mage, and her main task was to protect the second wall. She looked him straight in the eyes and firmly told him that he had to accept this and let her go. But Seagrin just shook his head. It didn't make sense to him, and Fiona didn't understand what he was talking about. He couldn't understand how something like this could happen in her life right now at the most inopportune moment. It was too unexpected and strange. He just couldn't comprehend that something like this was possible, especially at a time like this. The second wall seemed to be the most dangerous place, but she didn't seem to realize it. She didn't realize how deadly the situation she was in could be. Even mercenaries who had been through many battles and experienced knights who had fought on the battlefield their entire lives could die in the blink of an eye. But a child, unlike them, had no protection. He couldn't contain his emotions and started yelling at Jiran, demanding that he say something reasonable. He hoped that at least now he would be able to somehow explain what was happening. He couldn't understand that the strongest shield in the North Highland was so short of men that they were even taking children into their ranks. It seemed impossible. He couldn't understand whether the situation was really so critical that the only one who could provide protection was a small child. This fact amazed him, and he couldn't find an explanation. The servant felt slightly embarrassed because he did not know how to explain the situation to the young man. He stumbled trying to find the right words, but nothing suitable came to mind. Fiona couldn't let Jiran kick the guy out, so without thinking she stepped towards him and gently took his hand. There was so much confidence and determination in her gesture that it made everyone around her freeze. She understood perfectly well why Seagrin was angry. He had always had a strong sense of justice, and it had shown itself in his actions more than once. She had written about it in her notes. It was probably not the decision itself that irritated him, but the unfairness of it. He didn't like the idea of someone like him being sent to the battlefield as if they were nothing more than pawns in someone else's game. Fiona, noticing his agitation, tried to calm him down. She smiled and said that she was fine. But Seagrin looked at her with horror in his eyes and could not believe that she was not afraid. The girl calmly replied that she simply had no other choice. Regardless of fear or doubt, she had nowhere else to go, so she made this decision. She needed a place to stay, and the duchy needed a mage. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement, and she knew she had no other choice. She firmly stated that this was just a deal and there was nothing to be angry about. She chose this path herself, which meant there was no point in wasting energy on unnecessary emotions. In the end, the decision to stay in this place was hers alone. No one forced her to make this choice, so there was no point in blaming anyone else. She understood that until she came of age, she needed to live somewhere, and if that was the case, she had to put up with the conditions even if she didn't like them. It was important for Duke Hyland to have a strong mage at his disposal. It was the only factor that mattered in the current situation. Seagrin thought for a moment, then asked what was wrong with her family. Fiona calmly replied that it didn't matter because she was illegitimate. When the boy heard her story, he fell silent as if pondering every word. The girl said that her father, brothers, and sisters decided to send her here far from home. They hoped she would never come back. Seagrin wasn't surprised to hear this. He probably understood how she felt, having gone through something similar himself. No one will protect someone who is born a bastard. Such a person must pay a price if he wants to survive. There is no free protection in this world. You have to pay for your childhood one way or another. But looking at her, he noticed that her situation was much worse. She could actually die. He was surprised that she didn't feel fear, but the girl only calmly replied that if she was destined to die, it meant that she didn't have the strength or skills to survive. In any case, she is sure of one thing. No one forced her. She came here voluntarily, aware of the possible consequences of her choice. So there's no need to worry. She's not against the current situation, which means he shouldn't worry about her either. Then he decided it was time for him to leave. The girl did not detain him because she knew that each of their conversations was only a short respite before the trials to come. But she still noted that he should be careful. Besides, it was too early now and he hadn't had time to eat properly yet. Her words made him a little angry. Why did she care about him so much? Why did she set some rules as if she had the right to do so? The girl calmly replied, "Isn't it natural to take care of the wounded? It's simple human kindness, nothing more." Then the boy simply fell silent, unable to find anything to say. He was not used to such care and did not know how to react to it. As she left, he seemed to want to say something else but changed his mind. He just looked after her, thinking about her words. In the end, he only remained silent but still said, "Let her come back soon." This was the only thing he could say at that moment. The girl heard his words but was already in a hurry. She only assumed that he said something but did not turn around. Sighing, she quietly muttered to herself that she was sorry she was late. Even though he didn't know it, it was important for her to apologize. Duke Abel was also among those gathered. His gaze was intense, and it seemed that he was not just observing but assessing the situation with particular seriousness. Fiona didn't expect to see him here because she was sure he was busy with his own affairs. Most likely he heard the whole conversation, and this made her feel uneasy. His features remained stern, but there was something in his gaze that made her uneasy. He looked like he was angry, and that made her afraid. The conversation with the boy had lasted longer than she had expected. They had taken their time and the time had flown by, but now she realized that she had gotten too carried away by the conversation. So her delay seemed quite logical. Still feeling guilty, she apologized again for being late, hoping that it would not cause unnecessary questions. Abel seemed about to say something else, but then changed his mind. Later she realized that it wasn't important enough to pay attention to. In the end, he only briefly noted that this was not a topic worth discussing right now, perhaps later when the situation was more appropriate. He then turned to her and told her directly that she had to be by his side during the battle. He made it clear that this was not a request, but a demand. Without giving her a chance to object, he simply picked her up and carried her with him. It was unexpected, but there was no point in resisting, since he clearly had no intention of changing his mind. He had always been by her side in battle, so she didn't understand why he was emphasizing it now. Had anything changed? However, she did not argue, she simply nodded as a sign that she understood him. After that, they moved to where the next battle awaited them. That day, they successfully defended the second fortress wall. After that, life returned to normal, and it seemed that everything had become normal again. But despite this, something had changed. Her relationship with Seagrin now felt a little different, although she couldn't quite put her finger on what the difference was. When it became known that Fiona was a mage, his attitude towards her changed dramatically. Now he no longer made sarcastic remarks towards her or tried to hurt her with words. But despite this, during their conversations, he often cast confused glances at her as if he was trying to understand something important, but could not put all the pieces together into a single picture. This behavior seemed strange to her. Maybe he really thought she was unusual? Or maybe he just didn't know how to feel about her anymore? Either way, she couldn't ignore it. Meanwhile, Seagrin had finally fully recovered from his wounds. There was no longer any reason to keep him in the castle since he no longer needed care and constant medical supervision. But sending him back to the fourth wall also seemed wrong. After all, the mercenaries who had bullied him were still there, meaning his return could lead to disaster. Fiona didn't know what to do in this situation. Thoughts about it didn't give her any peace, and she walked around gloomy for days trying to find the right solution. But her thoughts were soon interrupted by the Duke's summons. He ordered her to come to his office, which only increased her anxiety. She knew she had to make a decision. After all, Abel had always fought by her side, and she couldn't stand aside when it came to the honor of their castle. But the fact that he accompanied her everywhere seemed strange. Was it distrust of her? Or did he doubt her powers and skills? She knocked on the door of the study, and the Duke immediately allowed her in. As soon as she crossed the threshold, she immediately asked why he had called her. He answered briefly that the conversation would be long and that she should sit down. There was no irritation in his voice, but she understood that the conversation would be about something important. But what surprised her most was that he called her by her first name. This had never happened before, and it made her wonder why he had suddenly changed his behavior. The Duke then reported that according to the doctor, the boy she had saved had fully recovered and could now leave the castle. At that moment, Fiona realized that perhaps the Duke was waiting for her to make a decision. Should she throw Seagrin out? But she hadn't yet decided what to do with him. She simply nodded, agreeing with his words, and he, carefully watching her reaction, reminded her that he usually did not welcome the appearance of strangers in the castle. She understood his position and generally agreed with him, but when she looked up, she noticed that the Duke suddenly smiled slightly. This confused her. She didn't understand what he was thinking, but it was obvious that he had something in mind, and she had to find out. He became curious. Why did she let this guy in? Did she really know who he really was? Maybe they had some kind of connection? Or did she have other reasons? Abel probably already figured out the guy's identity. He's not one to leave questions unanswered, especially when it comes to something important. And if he really found out who Seagrin is, then now he knows that in fact in front of him is not just a child but an adopted child. In such situations, there is usually no choice. Sometimes the only way out is to go all the way, no matter what the consequences. But she pretended not to understand what he was talking about. How could he just admit something so serious? If it were known that a commoner possessed the secret of the imperial family, it would be too suspicious. So she said that she only knew one thing. He was an orphan, and that Seagrin had once done small jobs for mercenaries. That explained a lot, but not everything. When he looks at her so intently, it seems to her that his gaze penetrates straight into her soul, as if he sees right through her. But it's better not to dwell on it. Compared to her, this boy is nothing special, just another orphan with no past. To be honest, he himself doesn't fully understand who she is. Sometimes she seems like an ordinary child of her age, lively, spontaneous, and at other times she acts so cool and reasonable that he has doubts. He just doesn't know what to think about her. The girl considered herself quite normal, but the Duke saw the situation differently. He knew that this was only her own perception. Anyone else looking at her might call her a genius. He pondered for a long time. Should he be careful in her presence or on the contrary take her under his protection? It's good that she's smart, but there's a danger in that mystery, and uniqueness can be a blessing and a curse like a sharp blade. The girl thought about the Duke's words and her heart sank with anxiety. Was he really going to kick her out? This fear made her clench her fists tighter, but she tried not to show her excitement. However, the Duke unexpectedly said something completely different. He does not want to kick her out at all, but on the contrary, he is going to keep her. Moreover, he wants her to gradually take on new tasks. The girl smiled with relief. She felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Now she didn't have to worry about being chased away, and she readily agreed to new assignments. Abel had always been wary of the imperial family. When they sent a strange girl as support, he couldn't help but suspect them of ulterior motives. If she didn't act her age, his suspicions would only grow stronger. Recently, he was informed about the disturbance of the residents of the Fourth Wall. The mercenaries who were assigned to maintain order were behaving aggressively and pestering local girls, causing discontent. Just think, these people dared to intimidate those he had sworn to protect. Their impudence knew no bounds, but at the same time demanded immediate intervention. Abel looked grim and stern, creating a truly eerie impression. However, he soon handed the girl a document telling her to read it carefully. The girl carefully took the papers in her hands and froze in shock. Her eyes widened and her fingers trembled when she saw what exactly was written in those lines. Fiona studied the people around her carefully, trying to figure out if this was really the same group Seagrin was with. Deep down, she knew why Abel had given her this particular task, but she wasn't sure she liked it. Despite the obvious facts, Fiona couldn't figure out what to do. The guy was perfectly healthy, which meant he didn't need her help, but for some reason she had to do it. It was clear to her that the Duke had understood her main problem, even if she hadn't said a word about it. It was a little scary, but at the same time it showed that he was observant and didn't miss anything. That is why, without hesitation, he announced to her that he was temporarily handing over the soldiers from the Fourth Wall to her command. It was unexpected, but apparently the Duke had a good reason for it. Fiona understood his mood perfectly. If these soldiers had dared to show disobedience, now they would pay for it in full. The Highlands always paid back tenfold for kindness and for mistakes. As Fiona looked around, she realized that this place really stood out from the others. She was even more interested in why the Duke was so worried about the child, because there was a special concern in his voice. Abel noted that they were going to head to the Fourth Wall anyway, so there was no point in worrying about such things now. He clearly didn't see it as a big deal. He suggested that she sort this matter out on the way, and Fiona agreed. She was quite happy with this solution, and she assured them that they could safely rely on her. The road turned out to be snow-covered, which caused them genuine admiration. At some point, Fiona noticed that someone had made a very impressive snowman, and this involuntarily made her smile. Seagrin just sighed heavily, clearly not sharing her enthusiasm. His expression was strange, as if he was trying to understand why she suddenly brought this up. The girl couldn't understand why he was acting so distant. She looked at him in bewilderment, wondering if he had never allowed himself to simply be happy like a child. Had he never experienced the delight of the first snow? The guy just turned away indifferently, throwing out that he had enough worries without this. He didn't see the point in such trifles, but deep down inside something else was gnawing at him, resentment that she hadn't warned him in advance about her decision to go to the battlefield. He tried to convince himself that it didn't hurt him, he wasn't offended at all, and yet his expression betrayed an irritation he couldn't hide. To change the subject, he said that if she had some free time, he could help her make something out of snow. She just sighed. She didn't have time to play yet. First of all, she had to complete the task the Duke had given her, but she was still glad that he suggested it. It meant that after she finished her business, they would have the opportunity to spend some more time together. And the guy at this time was perplexed by what she saw in him. Why would she want to play with someone like him? A bastard who doesn't even understand what can be funny for children their age. He didn't know what to say. There wasn't a single kind word in his head that he could say to her, and it was hard to believe that this fair-haired girl really had magical powers. Perhaps it was because he had never seen her in combat. She seemed to him like the heroine of a winter fairy tale. Her eyes sparkled red like rose petals, and her snow-white hair fell in light strands. Against the snow, her skin seemed even paler, as if it were made of the winter cold itself. There was something light and graceful in her movements, reminiscent of a white rabbit jumping in the snow, and yet it was hard to believe that this tiny mage girl was protecting one of the most dangerous walls. He was angry at those who had brought this child to such a dangerous situation, and also at those who had ignored everything that was happening to him. It was unfair and cruel. Fiona then explained that her actions had their own benefits, and there was no need to be angry, as it would all ultimately be beneficial. Her gaze was determined and calm. He was annoyed by her calm, by the way she had accepted this situation instead of worrying about his safety. It didn't seem right. Fiona continued to stare out the window, lost in her thoughts. He couldn't understand why she was so worried about someone who didn't mean anything important to her. He couldn't understand why she was worried about an orphan from a mercenary group. Maybe she was hiding something? Maybe she knew he had imperial blood, or maybe she was pursuing her own goals to use him or even destroy him. He still doubted her intentions, although he wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust her, but he couldn't. It was hard for him to open up to people, and his soul was tormented by doubts, especially when it came to possible betrayal. He thought he wouldn't survive her betrayal, but then she turned to him, and without expecting it, he asked what she really wanted from him. Fiona asked what the rules were in the mercenary group, as she had never encountered such people before. She was sure that there was a hierarchy. He replied that in their world everything was simple, only the strongest survived. This was the rule they followed in every situation without exception. In a mercenary group, everyone bowed to and obeyed the one who was stronger. The weak had no right to leadership, and their opinions were not taken into account. He explained that if she wanted to lead the mercenaries, she would have to prove that she was a threat to the others. That was the only way they would recognize her. Fiona understood him. It was a typical situation where the strong rule, the weak must obey. She knew she had to be strict and ruthless. She smiled, understanding everything he said, and added that now she would definitely be effective in control. She was sure that even the stupidest would understand her. He was shocked when he saw her face. She was absolutely calm and even happy, as if this situation did not frighten her, but on the contrary, inspired her. Fiona thanked him for his help, assuring him that it would be very useful to her, but the guy was completely confused. He couldn't understand what she was talking about. The boy asked why she was interested in how mercenaries were treated. This surprised him because mercenaries had always been a part of their lives, but why was she asking about it? The girl explained with a slight smile that it was all due to the Duke's order. She was intrigued, not knowing how exactly the mercenaries were behaving towards her, so she asked. Her interest was genuine, as she was not very familiar with the mercenaries, but the boy, sensing the tension, asked her to stop asking questions, stopping the conversation. He wondered what exactly the Duke had ordered, but before she could answer, the girl suddenly began to sneeze, which interrupted their conversation. Suddenly the carriage stopped abruptly, and neither of them understood what had happened. Everything happened so suddenly that no one had time to react to this stop. The girl, noticing the boy's surprise, calmly told him that they had already arrived and were now there. Everything turned out to be much simpler than he expected. It was a strange place, not as terrible as the second one, but still unusual. The boy looked around, trying to understand what exactly could surprise him here. She added that she now had to complete Abel's task immediately without further ado. This meant that time was running out and she would have to hurry. She quickly got out of the carriage, but the boy took her hand. She asked in surprise what it meant, trying to understand his reaction to her actions. He calmly explained that the carriage was quite high and it would be difficult for her to get out without help. This made her think that she might fall. She hesitated a bit, but he added that if she went out like that, she might actually fall. This made her think about the situation again. He was the first to get out of the carriage, offering his hand to help her down. It was his way of showing concern, without letting her take any risks. Seagrin, sensing her hesitation, asked her to take his hand and descend carefully. He wanted to help make everything as safe as possible. Fiona was completely shocked by his attention. She did not expect that he would take care of her like that. It was a new experience for her, which surprised her. But after a moment of surprise, she couldn't help but smile and laugh. It was a reaction to his concern, which she perceived as something very touching. The boy was a little embarrassed by her laughter and immediately asked what made her so happy. She apologized, trying to calm him down so as not to create an awkward situation. Finally, she held out her hand to him. Fiona was a strange girl after all, sweet and friendly, even to strangers like him. He still can't fully trust her care and kindness, although she tries. Many thoughts in his head prevent him from believing in the sincerity of her intentions. He still remained close to her, not daring to leave her. Time was dragging on, and he could not escape the feeling that something important was hidden between them. When the girl thanked him for his help, he felt embarrassed. Her words were simple, but there was sincerity in them, and he did not know how to react to it. She smiled at him. Her face became even more beautiful, and in that moment, he felt how her presence seemed to illuminate everything around him. If he continues to do these little acts of kindness, perhaps one day he will be able to repay her for everything she does for him. Suddenly, an idea popped into his head. Maybe he should be kinder. He didn't know what this impulse was, but he felt that something had to change. The gentleman asked with interest if this was really true, and the girl confirmed his doubts. She did not try to justify herself, she simply answered confidently. She noticed that it must have had the seal of a duke on it, indicating his high station. His gaze became more focused. The gentleman said that he and the girl were too young to make such decisions, so it was hardly possible. His words were filled with doubt and cold calculation. He ordered the girl to stop talking nonsense and go home. He was sure that her words did not matter, and he did not want to waste time on empty talk. Since no one knew her at the 4th level, this was understandable. She apologized, realizing that her opinion did not matter in the eyes of the master. But he still doubted the correctness of his decision. If he read it again, it might seem that her words made more sense than he thought. His behavior was more formal now, and she was pleased with it. He seemed willing to take the situation more seriously than before. She introduced herself as Fiona Green and explained that she had been sent there to deal with incidents on the 4th wall. She was determined to solve the problem. He asked her if she knew what exactly had happened, and she replied that she had already studied everything in the document. She confidently stated that she was ready to act if he was not trusted. The gentleman replied that there was no point in doing so because the situation was fine. He did not want to go into details and considered that interference was unnecessary. He said she should let them know if she needed help. They suggested that the military should take care of catching the criminals first, and they would handle that. Secondly, he advised to gather all the people in the village square. Thirdly, she suddenly stopped and looked at the guy, wondering what to do next. Fiona asked the boy if he knew where the mercenaries usually met, so she could understand their actions and approaches. She hoped that he would give her the information she needed. The guy replied that mercenaries usually gathered in the bar by the wall. The girl nodded and advised the man to take this into account when planning his further actions. The preparations were complete. Although people might look at her age with distrust, she felt that everything was done correctly. The mercenaries were probably doing their job at the highest level. The boy, feeling uneasy, asked what exactly the Duke had instructed her to do. He increasingly did not understand what her role was in this dangerous matter. Fiona wasn't sure, but she knew she wasn't planning on letting the mercenary go. Judging by Abel's behavior, the punishment could be very severe, perhaps even cutting off a body part. Fiona carefully pointed out that it wasn't quite his brain. He was only 14, and it would be best for her not to tell him anything that might shock him too much. So she said that these were just small details, and the main thing was to make a fair judgment and come back, but inside she wasn't sure how exactly it would all work out. Since the Duke had no intention of going with her, she could leave it all undecided. In any case, Seagrin clearly had no intention of accompanying her, and she had accepted that. But the guy suddenly said that he wanted to go with her. This left the girl completely confused. He added that he would definitely go with her and asked if she wanted his presence. Fiona turned away and said quietly that perhaps that wasn't the point. She just felt that such things would be too harsh for children and they wouldn't understand. Then the boy, not hiding his displeasure, reminded her that she seemed to have forgotten who was on the battlefield. The scars she saw were not old wounds, but very recent ones. He continued assuring her that she might not trust him because of their relationship, but despite this, he was quite skilled at this and knew that he could help. The girl, coming closer, noticed that she certainly knew this, but how all this was connected with his decision to go with her, she did not understand. Why was this important to her? The boy explained that this was not exactly what he wanted to say, but in any case he was ready to become her protection, if she needed it, and be the one to cover for her. He added that many of those around her do not look at her with kind eyes, and two people can always cope better than one in such a situation. He raised his eyebrows slightly, and noticing that she understood, suggested that they continue on their way. If she was ready, then they could move on without wasting time on doubts. She wasn't entirely sure of his words, but seeing his concern, she knew it was important to him. He was clearly worried about her safety. He even blushed a little, which she didn't miss. It made her smile as if she felt that despite all the seriousness, something had changed. If all this didn't make sense, she still decided to continue following him. His confidence seemed to be transmitted to her, and despite everything, she trusted him. The guy told everyone to look at the two kids walking towards them, and one of them was probably the Duke's face. It was noticeable, but he himself still doubted it. However, many still doubted considering her a fraud, because it was hard to believe that this was really a child. A child's body seemed too uncomfortable for such a role. How strange that Abel had given her power in the duchy, despite his doubts. He had trusted her with it anyway, though Fiona could not understand why he had chosen her. It would have been easier, of course, to send an adult, for example, her servant Jaron, but she decided not to waste time and focus on completing her task. All that was needed was to decide how to punish the mercenaries. Frankly, the importance of the punishment was not only in its severity, but also in how it would be perceived. The mercenary who committed the crime had to feel it. For example, she knew she had to warn everyone that if they did what he did, the same fate would await them, so that everyone knew that the consequences were inevitable. If it was handled correctly, it would help maintain order in the village, but if the punishment was too lenient, Fiona knew it could backfire. People will always think, if there are no serious consequences, then what's stopping you from doing the same thing again? That's how people are, and it could undermine her authority. Fiona began to wonder what kind of punishment would be appropriate for the northern region, where stealing could result in a hand being chopped off. The place was known for its harshness in matters of punishment. Since the criminals sexually abused women and children, she came to the conclusion that the only way out was to cut off their vital body parts so that the punishment would be fair. When Seagrin heard her proposal, he was horrified and immediately asked again. Fiona calmly replied that it was nothing special, it was just a method suitable for the region. As she expected, Fiona knew she should have told Seagrin to come back first, but she decided not to rush as the situation required thoughtfulness. If a solution is not found, she may have to drive them outside the castle walls into the forests where powerful and dangerous monsters live ready to deal with them. Fiona decided that it was better to let the criminals themselves choose what was worse for them, punishment or death, offering two options so that they would understand the seriousness of their situation. Seagrin finally turned to Fiona and noted that they had arrived at the location. The atmosphere had become more tense, but no decision had been made yet. Everyone around was discussing that these children were still too young and did not understand what the Lord was really thinking. Many found it difficult to believe that the girl really represented the Duke. The situation was becoming increasingly unclear, but Fiona was ready to give the command. The guy was serious, but she in turn preferred a calm and polite approach. Fiona asked them to politely step aside, hoping that the situation would not get out of hand and that they could resolve everything without unnecessary tension and abrupt steps. The men looked calmly at Fiona and told her she could continue on her way, letting them pass. This did not cause them any irritation or displeasure. The girl thanked them for their attention, and Seagrin could not understand how Fiona maintained such calm composure in such situations. It was difficult for him to comprehend. Fiona, in turn, just smiled and said that there was absolutely no point in getting angry at such moments. She had learned not to give in to emotions in such situations. Suddenly, a young girl ran up to Fiona and asked her to stop. She was pleasantly surprised that the lady actually came as promised. Seagrin stood there confused, not understanding what was happening. He watched what was happening, but he couldn't connect the dots. His thoughts were all jumbled up. Fiona quietly explained to him that everything was fine, reassuring him. She added that she did not understand how this girl became responsible for such a task, but it was her business. Meanwhile, she noted that mercenaries are not easy to deal with, especially if such people disturb the order in the village and threaten the peace of local residents. Fiona thought that such actions would make people feel uneasy. She noticed that the woman, although she tried to intervene, did not want to stay away. Charlotte said she couldn't stand still when she saw a child going up against such dangerous people. She couldn't ignore such a threat. Fiona asked if she could learn the brave girl's name. She introduced herself as Charlotte, and Fiona nodded, impressed by her determination. Fiona thanked Charlotte for her care and attention. She was touched by how much this girl cared about her despite her youth and inexperience. However, Fiona reminded them that they had to continue their journey. Turning to Seagrin, she said that it was time to go and they could not waste time if they wanted to make it on time. As they approached, they suddenly heard loud screams. These were alarming sounds that immediately attracted their attention. They stopped, stunned and not knowing what to do. From a distance, they saw a man who was trying to somehow stop a group of mercenaries. He was desperately fighting, but they could not understand what caused this conflict. The mercenaries were shouting that this was their territory and everyone had to leave. It sounded threatening and the situation was becoming increasingly tense. There was a threat in the air. Then one of them finally realized that these were the same people he had heard about before. These were the ones they were supposed to face, and now they were here. It all became clear. They were strong and dangerous, and even several guards had a hard time dealing with them. The situation was far from as simple as they had hoped. The woman approached the largest of the mercenaries. He glanced at her but noticed Seagrin and, smiling, began calling him brat, which sounded mocking and rude. They were surprised that the man they called a riceworm was here and that he was still alive. It was unexpected and no one could understand how it was possible. But the girl quickly took Seagrin's hand, trying to calm him down. She whispered for him to relax, and then confidently walked towards the man, ready to talk to him. His huge figure was noticeable against the background of the village, and he constantly created problems for the locals with his behavior. The presence of this man made everyone nervous. He often caused riots, terrorizing the village. The boy Seagrin was often bullied by him. Plus, he committed robberies, assaults, and even harassment. Fiona, who introduced herself as Duke Abel's envoy, announced that she had come with a mission to end the useless resistance and restore order. Her words had no effect. The man grinned and began to mock her. He did not understand why such a young girl decided to command, and this only provoked him. He continued his threat, claiming that if the Duke's mercenaries came, she would be in even greater distress and her attempts to change anything would be in vain. The people standing nearby started shouting that they were the ones who stopped this monster when it attacked the village and became heroes in their eyes. But it was not that clear. A few locals started shouting as if they had actually saved the village, but Fiona knew that the situation was actually much more complicated, and no one was such a hero. Fiona, realizing that talking wouldn't help, used her magic, striking lightning near the man to demonstrate her power and silence him. The man was very scared, not understanding what had just happened. He was dumbfounded, not knowing how to react to such an unexpected display of force. Words of hatred began to pour from his lips, but the people standing nearby also could not believe what was happening. Everything around froze in surprise and fear. Fiona calmly said that it would be much better if he just listened to her. At that moment, it was clear that she was not going to back down. She added that now everything fell into place and everyone had to understand that her power was not a joke for him, but her determination did not end there. Fiona, holding off his attempts to protest, said that everything was not yet decided. She then grabbed several other men, increasing her power in this situation. The lightning that struck around them frightened the rest, and they, seeing her power, no longer tried to resist. She said that she would leave everything as it was until they learned to obey. Fiona, addressing everyone, said that they must continue to kneel until they realized that the punishment for disobedience would be much worse than it was now. Now that things have finally calmed down, Fiona Green can begin to sort out her cases in court. This moment has been long anticipated, and the tension in the air is palpable. A few days ago, there was a serious incident in a pub. 5 people were attacked, and a lot of valuables were stolen. This is clearly not a simple matter. Seagrin, watching what was happening, could not help but think she was a real magician, and it was obvious her abilities were amazing. He could not help but notice it. What was even more surprising was that she was fighting at the second wall. There was something unusual about her magic. She used it much more effectively than the others. He had seen people who could create a fireball, but what she could do was on another level. It was the first time he had met a master like Fiona. Slowly, Seagrin began to understand why the Duke held her so close. She was a young and confident girl standing in front of men who seemed rough and cruel. Regardless of what happens next, this event will remain in people's memories. Fiona left a deep impression on them, and her unusualness did not go unnoticed. Word of this would spread throughout the land. Moreover, Fiona was treated so well in Castle Halen that she could not be considered a mere soldier. Duke Hylan was not the type to do such things without a reason. Seagrin began to wonder what Duke Abel really wanted with this unusual girl. Seagrin often wondered if he would ever find the answer to the big question, but this time it seemed the answer was never found. He was too young to understand the complexities of the situation. Seagrin was one of the orphan boys who joined the mercenary group. He felt lost and didn't know how to help Fiona. His situation seemed hopeless. He doubted he would ever see her again. Seagrin told himself that they might not even be friends. She would quickly forget about him once they returned to the castle. Fiona suggested 2 options. She said the first was to go outside the castle walls, and they had to be completely naked without weapons or protection so as not to break the rules. Everyone present was stunned by her words, not believing that she could offer something so crazy. But it seems that this is not all she wanted to say. She voiced a second option. The second option was far more horrific. She suggested that the men lose an important part of their bodies. Seagrin realized this was no joke, and horror gripped him. Hearing these words, the crowd literally froze in horror. Many people began to whisper in panic. The girl, however, simply smiled without the slightest doubt. The men began to groan in confusion. Seagrin was stunned by what was happening and did not know how to react to such cruelty. It was too much for him. The lady seemed to mock their fear, for no one had expected her to propose such horrific punishments. Everyone felt that their lives were hanging by a thread. Of course, Fiona may have been planning to show some mercy, but no one could tell. There was a coldness in her eyes, and everything around her became even more frightening. The choice was simple: go out and face danger and humiliation, or accept a cruel option that would ruin their lives forever. Seagrin didn't know which to choose. The men were angry, but they did not understand why they were the ones who had to bear this punishment. They felt it was unfair that they had been accused. What particularly outraged them was that they were not supposed to encounter northerners with their wild and uncivilized customs. This seemed absurd. Without mercenaries to protect them, they would hardly survive. They would not stand a chance against the monsters lurking in these wild lands. The Duchy of Hylan promised to compensate the mercenaries for any losses they incurred while defending the land from monsters, making the risk worth it. Although Abel Halan was cold in appearance, he was always fair. He knew well how to appreciate the bravery of those who fought for his duchy, but there was another benefit. Mercenaries could get a decent reward by selling the trophies they took from the bodies of monsters after victory. She understood that all these people came here because of their own interests. Hylon needed people for protection, and the mercenaries needed money. It was all obvious. She knew that if they couldn't make a choice, she would make the decision for them. After all, time was short, and they had to act decisively. One of the men started shouting, demanding that she be untied immediately, but she knew she had to finish it quickly so as not to hold up people on this cold day. To be honest, she herself had been shivering from the cold for a long time, and the others were silent as if they did not know what to say, freezing in anticipation of a decision. The girl wasn't sure. It seemed like the temperature had dropped a little. Maybe it was just her imagination. Everything around her began to feel a little colder than before. Suddenly, the Duke's voice was heard from behind, asking what decision they had made. He approached unnoticed and appeared next to them as if he had appeared out of nowhere. The girl turned around and was a little surprised to see him next to her. She had not expected the Duke to be so close at such a moment when they were discussing something important. Now it became clear to her that it was the Duke who was the cause of that cold feeling. It seemed as if the frosty air had come with his appearance, as if following him. She turned around again, and raising her eyebrows slightly, asked him what brought him here at this moment, what he was looking for in this situation, and what he needed from them. The Duke calmly replied that he did not need a specific reason to inspect his territory. He was the master of these places, and it was his right. Meanwhile, Jaren muttered an apology, quietly feeling awkward about everything that was happening. The girl replied that she understood him perfectly well. There was nothing wrong with it. Then the Duke, without further ado, lifted her up in his arms, showing unexpected concern. He also asked her what she thought of the proposed options and how she assessed them. The girl replied that she was simply wondering at what point he had started listening. She was wary because she could not understand what exactly had interested him. The Duke, smiling slightly, said that his attention had been drawn to the words about them being wild, uncivilized northerners. This had aroused his interest and a desire to hear more. Now the girl realized that their situation was critical. If they were lucky, they would survive, but with great difficulty. She offered them a choice of two options. The first punishment option was very strange and cruel. They had to go outside the castle walls naked or lose the part of their body capable of reproduction. He liked both options. She didn't understand why she gave them such a choice. It was something incomprehensible and strange. The reasons for her decision remained a mystery to her. The girl who witnessed it said that both options were too cruel, so she wanted to show mercy and stop it. She couldn't do otherwise. The Duke, despite her words, smiled and calmly said that mercy would not help here. He was sure that such feelings were inappropriate here. He recalled that he always said that he would destroy those who dared to raise their hand against his people. Those who commit a crime will have to suffer severe punishment. The Duke walked up to the men without mercy. He stepped on them with such force that they felt terrible pain. This was his decision, and he was not going to stop. He said that people like them were completely unnecessary in his world. Their fate was sealed, and no amount of justification would change his mind. Even though the Duke held her in his arms, there was rage in his eyes. The thirst for blood was so strong that it made her skin crawl. She could feel it in the air. The Duke declared that since they dared to look upon his kingdom, his rule must be cruel. He must follow the rules he had set. Otherwise, he would not be a duke. He decided on a punishment. Both were to lose the body part that had caused their crime. After that, they would be banished from the castle walls so that they would not cause any more trouble. He ordered the men to get to work immediately. He turned around and, holding the girl's hand, began to walk away without looking back. Everything was decided, and he was not going to linger. Turning to Fiona, the Duke told her that next time she should not worry about such trifles. Everything had already been decided, and her worries were now unnecessary. He recalled that such decisions could put many people's lives at risk. Abel was cruel and vicious, and his actions always had dire consequences. But she wondered why Abel, who had always been so unfriendly and nasty, had decided to go through all this. What could have motivated him to go this way despite his tamed malice? Duke Abel Halen had come all this way for a reason. His main reason was his concern for Lady Fiona. Despite his cold exterior, he could not remain indifferent to her situation. The lady hearing this looked at Geron in surprise, as if doubting that everything she had heard was true. She even asked again whether she had understood him correctly because such words sounded unexpected. If he had told her that the world would end tomorrow, it would have been easier to believe than that the Duke was actually worried. The very idea seemed impossible. Geron calmly explained that his lordship had a complex and difficult character. He was not one to openly express his emotions, so his behavior had to be taken correctly. It's true. To be honest, the Duke seems more like a nasty person than a kind one. His harshness and coldness are off-putting, but there's more to it than that. He's terrible at expressing emotion. The way he does it is even worse, and yet no matter how complicated he is, he really did come here this time out of concern for her. The girl was surprised, but Geron continued. In his opinion, the Duke most likely did not expect her to be able to cope with this task. Perhaps he was even sure that she would give up. However, this does not mean that the Duke is exactly that kind of person. In any case, Fiona should be more confident in herself because she managed despite everything. Although Geron himself does not fully understand what exactly His Grace is thinking, he is sure that Fiona will soon find out everything herself. Everything will fall into place in time. After these words, he decided to leave them alone. He said that he would go buy something warm and they could continue making a snowman together. Fiona agreed, although she noticed that he seemed slightly agitated. This worried her a little, but she decided not to dwell on it, since perhaps he was just tired or thinking about something. Instead of racking her brain over it, she decided to just have fun playing with Seagrin. She didn't want to burden herself with unnecessary thoughts when she could just enjoy the moment. She turned to the boy and smiling asked if he could connect the head and body. It seemed like an interesting challenge to her, and she was curious if he could do it. The guy confidently replied that he could and immediately got to work. In just a few minutes, everything was ready and the result looked much better than expected. Fiona was delighted, thanked him sincerely, and added that now all she had to do was carefully align everything so that it looked even better. As he watched her efforts, a slight smile appeared on his face, but soon he became slightly embarrassed, as if he had not expected to be watching her actions so closely. He suddenly looked at Fiona and after a moment's hesitation asked what she was going to do next. Apparently he wanted to continue the conversation. The girl thought for a moment, then shrugged, saying she didn't know. She would just live as she had until nothing changed. However, the boy was clearly asking about something else. Realizing this, Fiona narrowed her eyes. He wasn't talking about her future in general, but something more specific. Then she asked herself, what exactly does he want to know? She looked at him, not quite understanding what he meant, and asked him again what exactly he had just said, hoping that he would explain more precisely. The guy calmly repeated that he wanted to know if she was going to come. His voice was even, but his eyes were expectant of her answer. The girl smiled because she had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. Her reaction seemed so sincere and carefree that it only made him angrier. He looked at her intently and said bluntly that he wanted to know if she would come back to see him. There was a hidden hope in his voice. The girl blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected such a question. Now he was really asking if she was coming, and it seemed like it wasn't a joke at all. He looked very embarrassed, which completely confused her. She couldn't understand why he was acting so strangely. But he suddenly turned away and, trying to hide his emotions, said that it didn't matter. He didn't even think of complicating things anymore. Seagrin would have chuckled if he hadn't felt so vulnerable. He felt like she was just caring about him, but even he knew that was stupid. The girl confidently approached him and, without looking away, said that it was not true. She promised that she would definitely come again. Then she took his hand lightly. Seagrin flushed, but the girl paid no attention to it and added that she would come to him every day. He quickly turned away and muttered that she didn't have to force herself to come so often. But the girl quickly reminded that it was she who first suggested that they become friends. So she will come no matter what, and this is not up for discussion. Seagrin looked at her in surprise. He hadn't expected such an answer, and something warm inside him trembled. After these words, there was silence, and it became a little awkward. Both did not know what to say next. The girl wondered why he was silent. Perhaps she said something wrong. Fiona felt awkward, as if she was out of place. To hide her embarrassment, she decided to distract herself and began to mentally count sheep, imagining them jumping over an imaginary fence one by one. Suddenly, the boy interrupted her thoughts by asking her a favor. There was hope in his voice as he said that he wanted her to visit him more often from now on. Fiona immediately confirmed that she would definitely do this. After all, if he could not come to the castle without hindrance, then she herself must ensure that their meetings continued. In response, he admitted that he was going to find a job so that he could come to her himself someday without any obstacles or prohibitions. It seemed unfair to him that she was the only one making the effort to meet. If they were friends, then he should also make a step towards her so as not to force her to constantly go to him alone. For Halon Castle is not just a place where anyone can come. If he says he will come there, it means he intends to take a high position in Halon territory so that he has the right to be near her. He understood perfectly well that his words might seem like empty dreams to her. After all, he was just an orphan deprived of family home and any connections. But Fiona had no doubts about him. She firmly stated that she believed that he would succeed and that one day he would be able to achieve everything he wanted. And not only that, over time, he will be able to achieve much more than he can even imagine now. When he grows up, a bright future awaits him. A life filled with prosperity, recognition, and power. There will definitely be someone next to him who will give him care and love, who can heal his heart, no matter how wounded it is. Fiona promised that everything would be fine. In fact, she vowed to help him achieve his goals and take a step toward that future. She promised herself she would do it as soon as she saw the scar on his face. Then, on that freezing day, she decided she would finish this snowman no matter how cold it was. Soon the servant came, but she did not even pay attention to him. She was more concerned with the fact that she had actually become Seagrin's friend, and this thought filled her with pride. Days passed, turning into years. 5 years had passed, and now she was standing again in that very place by the high stone wall, lost in memories. Looking out over the endless expanse of snow, she wondered if she was crazy to have chosen Halon, a place frozen to the bone, as her home. She still couldn't find the answer. Was there any point in winter never ending here? Or was it just a whim of fate that she had to come to terms with? The frost penetrated to the bones, the cold constrained her movements, and she no longer knew how to fight this feeling. She was tired of the cold, of the constant snow, of the eternal winter. It had been 5 years since she had come to Halon, but the cold was still stronger than she. She was 18 now, but she was still helpless against the icy breath of winter. The men insistently warned the lady to be on guard and not to let down her guard. Danger could lurk at any moment, and they were worried about her safety. They asked her anxious questions, trying to test her readiness. What would she do if monsters suddenly appeared from the darkness? Would she be ready for such a turn of events? Fiona just waved her hand in response, thinking that this soldier must have been in real combat for the first time. He seemed too nervous and unsure. Looking at him closely, she felt a strange sense of familiarity. She soon realized that it was Alan smiling. She told him not to worry in vain. She was completely focused now. Neither fear nor doubt could shake her. She knew why she was here and what she had to do. If she loses concentration even for a moment, it could lead to serious problems. You have to be on your toes so you don't miss anything important. However, there was no need to worry about her. It was better to let the men carefully examine the surroundings. The enemy could be much closer than it seemed. If someone was distracted for even a second, they could immediately become prey for monsters. In such conditions, you can't afford to relax. Fiona noticed that Alan was much more skittish than she had expected. He obviously needed support, and she decided to calm him down a little. Coming closer, she said softly but confidently that there was nothing to be afraid of. She was here precisely to prevent the worst from happening. This guy was clearly embarrassed, and it was evident in his behavior. It seemed like he really liked Fiona and didn't know how to act around her. But suddenly, as if trying to distract himself from his embarrassment, he shouted loudly. He warned her that there were demons around and that she should be careful. There was genuine panic in his voice. He was very scared because, to tell the truth, he did not have much combat experience, and such situations scared him to death. Fiona, however, only sighed. She knew there was no point in trying to calm him down if he couldn't pull himself together and focus on the task at hand. She looked at him more closely. This soldier was still too young, inexperienced. He needed not only support but also protection from more experienced fighters. Seagrin, who was standing next to her, was watching the situation carefully. He quietly but firmly told her not to stand around, doing nothing but to move a little to the side. Once upon a time, Seagrin's presence had evoked completely different feelings in her. They had not disappeared even after so much time. Something warm still lived in her heart. But now, as he stands against the backdrop of this dark, ominous landscape, there is something frightening about his appearance. It is as if he himself has become part of this dark picture. He had visibly matured and was now truly handsome. Fiona turned to him, and Seagrin, grinning, looked at her curiously, asking what she wanted. Despite the external changes, he was still in adolescence. Now he was 19, officially an adult, but there was still something youthful about him. Fiona pointed out that he should apologize for scaring that soldier so much. However, the boy countered that Abel had said that all the newcomers were already trained for combat. If he was already starting to get scared because of such a trifle, then the real problems were still ahead, so he wasn't going to worry about it. Better to focus on the matter at hand. This was only the beginning, but the men already understood. The situation was developing in such a way that there was almost no chance of survival. If this continued, they would really be finished. Abel wondered why Seagrin was acting strangely with Fiona. He never had problems with other people. What was it about her that bothered him so much? Fiona just chuckled and told him to just watch. Then, turning to the soldiers, she said there was no reason to worry and they could relax. She was just like them. No different, no need for special treatment, so they shouldn't worry about her presence. They would get better soon, she had no doubt about it. But then one of the guys suddenly spoke up, saying he had an important question. He had heard that one of the soldiers would be chosen to guard Lady Fiona, even if only for an evening. If he worked hard, he might be the one chosen. This question surprised her. Her soldiers are experienced and professional. It is not surprising that newcomers look at them with admiration and dream of being in their place. She replied that everything was exactly like that. Of course, she was waiting for them. After all, they would become her protectors. After these words, the guys became noticeably nervous. Some even became embarrassed, not knowing how to react to such attention from her. Fiona didn't understand why Seagrin was looking at them so strangely. Deciding she'd had enough, she looked away in case her presence would frighten the soldiers again. It was no surprise Seagrin was increasingly reminiscent of Abel. His expression, his gaze, his manner of silently observing what was happening. 5 years had passed since Fiona had arrived in Hylon. This meant only one thing. The moment when the original story would begin was approaching, which meant that events would begin to unfold rapidly. She was now 18 and Seagrin was 19. Time passed and they both grew older, gradually approaching the fateful moments that would change their lives. With only a few months left until their next birthdays, Seagrin had fulfilled a promise he made as a child over the years and was now moving confidently toward his goals. As he grew up, he not only improved his swordsmanship under the tutelage of Duke Abel, but also achieved a position that allowed him to enter and leave Hylon without hindrance. Now no one dared to look down on Seagrin. People not only feared his strength but also respected him, realizing that he was not just a young man, but a person who was better not to mess with. Fiona didn't stand still either. She continued to work hard, striving for her main goal, a peaceful life. Thanks to the sale of monster parts, she was able to earn enough money. Frankly, she didn't have to worry about money anymore. All she had to do was wait for Seagrin to meet Eunice and make sure their story unfolded as planned. If everything went according to plan, she would finally be able to enjoy a peaceful life. However, there was one person who was threatening her perfect plan. The Duke turned to Fiona, reminding her that she should have accepted his proposal by now, and hinted that she should think about it more seriously. Fiona replied that she was still thinking about it. The proposal could ruin her plan and she did not want to rush into a decision. However, the Duke suddenly added that she should start calling him Dad. Recently, Abel offered her to become his adopted daughter, but the girl immediately made it clear that she was not interested in such a development of events. The Duke merely said that she should at least think about it anyway, but Fiona was not going to change her mind. She wanted to wait until Seagrin got married and then quietly leave and live a quiet life. The Duke told Fiona that the power, wealth, and title that Helan possessed could be hers, but it seemed that even if that happened, she would not care at all. She calmly replied that she really didn't care, to which the Duke pointed out that if he became her father, she would be able to get absolutely everything she wanted. However, Fiona only grimaced, stating that she was already sick at the very thought that the Duke of Helan could become her father, and this option did not suit her at all. The Duke chuckled, calling her a ruthless girl. She had grown up, become independent, but if she was not satisfied with the idea, he was ready to forget about his proposal. Still, much had changed in these 5 years. He added that he was truly grateful to Fiona, but she could not understand why he had suddenly brought this up. For a moment, it even occurred to her that perhaps the Duke was seriously ill. The Duke admitted that it was hard for him to talk about it, so he asked her to just be quiet and listen. She had been used to fighting monsters since she was a child, but he was sure that Helan's pride was the only thing that could stop her. The situation in Helan is now stable. There are fewer monsters, and he has strong knights like Seagrin and experienced soldiers ready to defend these lands. So if Fiona really wants to leave, he won't stop her, but she has to understand that this choice is now entirely in her hands. She is already an adult and can do whatever she wants. No one has the right to tell her what to do, and she does not need anyone's permission to decide how to live her life. Thanks to her magical abilities, she can easily afford a luxurious life in the capital and enjoy comforts that others can only dream of. And if she's worried about being a bastard, let her know that he, as Duke of Helan, is ready to defend her honor and name if the need ever arises. If she accepted his offer, no one in the capital would dare to treat her badly, but Fiona only grinned and admitted that she couldn't even imagine such a situation. The Duke didn't immediately understand what she meant. Then Fiona clarified that she was certainly touched by his generosity, but she didn't think it was truly deserving. She added that he had already paid her back in full for everything. They were even, and there was no point in offering her anything more. In her opinion, this was quite enough. But the Duke looked at her with obvious bewilderment. Did she think he was simply paying off a debt? It was a fair payment for her work, and that was not the same thing at all. Fiona was a little taken aback. She hadn't thought Abel could be so generous. Sighing, she apologized for previously thinking he was a cold and unfeeling person. In response, he simply handed her the letter silently. Then he said that he wanted her to take it because it came from her house. Fiona was surprised. The letter had indeed been sent from the home of her family, the Earl of Green. She couldn't help but remember the day she had been sent here without a choice. Her relatives sent their child to the battlefield without hesitation, not even thinking about what awaited her. They did not care whether she would survive or not. In all these years, they had not sent her a single message, not a single word, and suddenly, a letter. It was strange because she had long since stopped expecting any news from them. The Duke shrugged and said he didn't know why it had come now. However, it didn't seem like he trusted her family at all. However, he added that if she wished, he could destroy this house, since it was they who had once doomed her to such a childhood. He has enough dirt on them, and if Fiona even says a word, he will crush them like pathetic insects. This is what Duke Abel's help looks like, apparently. But Fiona just shrugged and calmly replied that she wasn't that vindictive. Frankly, she didn't care at all. The Duke chuckled, noting that it was indeed like her. In his place with such power, he would have destroyed them all, leaving not the slightest trace. However, she was more worried about something else. She was sure that very soon the original story would begin, and then many things would change. The main character will appear very soon, and if Fiona stays close to Seagrin, everything may not go according to plan. It could drive her crazy. However, she expressed her gratitude for the offer. The Duke responded by suggesting that she call him father if she wanted to truly show her appreciation. However, Fiona didn't even think twice, and immediately declared that this option was absolutely not suitable for her, so it was better not to even talk about it. Abel just snorted at this, calling her a truly cruel girl, but Fiona just laughed, not taking his words seriously at all. Today he was especially grumpy, and it even amused her. She finally decided to look at the letter that the Duke had given her. However, as soon as she ran through the lines, she froze in complete shock. The letter contained a request for confirmation of her death. It said that her father Earl Green was dying, and they were therefore settling questions of inheritance. They needed a document confirming her death. It turns out that no one had originally expected her to survive. They had long since written her out of their lives. To them, she was just a nuisance who was once sent to certain death, not wanting to recognize her as part of the family. They had forgotten about her for 5 long years, but now they remembered her only because of the inheritance. It proved that this family would never change. But she was not at all interested in the Greens' wealth, and even less was she going to say goodbye to her father on his deathbed. However, it was strange that all this was happening at the very moment when Abel told her to live the way she wanted. The family will be furious to learn that she is alive. As long as her name is still on the Greens' books, if her death is not confirmed, the truth will come out. Fiona debated whether to sign the renunciation of her inheritance. Abel had said that she could take revenge on the family, but it seemed pointless. She didn't want to take revenge for what had happened 5 years earlier. There was no need for her to seek revenge or harm these aristocrats. If she did not want to risk going to prison, the easiest and most peaceful option was to simply cut all ties with them. The best solution is to officially renounce the inheritance and become a stranger to them. However, to do this, she will have to return home to personally sign all the documents. However, she was still planning to take a walk around the capital, so this trip might even come in handy. Fiona weighed the pros and cons again, thinking about her choice. At that moment, the door to her room opened slightly, and Seagrin peered inside cautiously, as if he was unsure whether to go in. He asked if she was there. Fiona turned her head towards the door and, shrugging her shoulders, said that he could come in. Not wanting to keep him waiting, she even went over and opened the door for him. However, the guy stopped at the threshold, not rushing to go in. Instead, he suggested that they talk right there, making it clear that he did not want to go any further. She couldn't help but feel a little sad. Just a few years ago, they had been so close that they could talk for hours while sitting on her bed. Now it was as if a wall had grown between them. Lately, Seagrin has been acting awkward, as if he was feeling uneasy. Perhaps it is because they are no longer children but have become adults, and their relationship has changed a little. Finally, he decided to speak. He said that he had heard something from Abel, but before he could continue, Fiona corrected him. He should call him teacher. Seagrin nodded and continued. The teacher had said that Fiona might leave Halon, and he wanted to know if it was true. The girl did not deny it. It was indeed possible. Then Seagrin looked at her thoughtfully and asked where exactly she was going to go. The letter said that her father was dying, so she should return to the capital. The Green family are middle-class aristocrats who own their own mansion in the city. Seagrin was amazed that she still called the man who had so easily abandoned her father. Although, to be honest, Fiona herself was uncomfortable calling him that. The guy asked incredulously, is she really going to spend time with her dying father, wait until he dies, and then just go back? Fiona shook her head, saying he had it all wrong. She wasn't planning on staying there, but after so many years in Halon, she'd be interested in visiting the capital for once. Seagrin then asked when she planned to return. However, Fiona hesitated, not knowing what to say because he had completely misunderstood the meaning of her words. In the end, she said outright that she really wasn't going to come back. She didn't see the point and had made that decision for herself long ago. The guy literally went speechless from shock, and then raising his voice began to demand an explanation, not believing that she was saying this seriously. But Fiona remained calm and firmly repeated that she had no intention of returning to Halon. However, Seagrin could not understand why she had decided so. She explained that she simply had no reason to stay there. Over the past 5 years, they had become really close friends, and she had defended him on more than one occasion. But now that the original story was about to begin, he would no longer need her help. However, Seagrin suddenly interrupted her, saying that they urgently needed to talk. Fiona finally admitted that she had decided to leave, and it was a decision she had made. She was confident in her choice and was ready to move on no matter what. The Duke, hearing her decision, could not understand why she had come to such a conclusion so quickly. Fiona, with an unperturbed look, reminded him that she was an adult and now made her own decisions. Seagrin, standing nearby, was furious. He did not hold back and began to call Abel names, not hiding his displeasure at all. Fiona could not help but laugh, telling him to be careful with his words. However, Seagrin was absolutely terrified that Fiona was going to leave and didn't know how to react to her words. He was dumbfounded, feeling that she might actually leave him. He recovered a little from this shock, forgetting everything they had been through for the last 5 years. But Fiona thought he was just upset, and with a smile she said that she would write to him. But Seagrin was not reassured. He tried again to explain to her that this was important to him, and that the decision was not so easy to make. She in turn asked in bewilderment what he was even talking about. Seagrin, clearly at a loss for how to express his feelings, said that the whole problem was in them, and that he could not figure out what exactly was bothering him about the decision. Fiona turned to him and quietly told him not to continue. She added that she didn't want to hear him say that they would always be together, because that wasn't true anymore. They are both no longer children. Despite the fact that they have been friends for years, it is time to go their separate ways. They are adults, and must accept the inevitable separation. Seagrin clenched his fists, exhaled, and bitterly noted that Fiona was being too heartless, but she only smirked and said that he should use logic and not be dramatic. He frowned and asked if she planned to stay in the capital permanently. There was tension in his voice, as if he hoped she would say no. But Fiona wasn't sure she wanted to go somewhere warm first, where she could just relax and not think about what was coming next. Now Seagrin understood her wish, but his expression became too gloomy, and Fiona, noticing this, grinned, asking him not to look at her so sadly. They had grown up a long time ago, and it was time for Seagrin to understand that they couldn't always be together. Apparently, he really believed that he would always be with her, but Fiona understood his reaction. Her trip to the capital worried him because there were people there who hated him and wanted him dead. For Seagrin, the capital is not just a place but a homeland from which he was once exiled. Returning there meant facing the past again. Fiona gently reminded him that he shouldn't be sad. He still had many challenges ahead of him, and he was stronger than he thought. In any case, according to the plot, he will still end up in the capital, and Fiona confidently said that she will always be on his side wherever he is. Fiona, with a slight smile, said that if he ever needed her help, he could just call and she would come any time. But Seagrin suddenly asked what would happen if he asked her to stay. This made things much more complicated. If he continued to hold on to Halon, the plot that was supposed to be moving forward would remain in place, and the original story would simply not be able to continue. Fiona confidently declared that this would not happen. Then Seagrin frowned, noticing that she was contradicting herself. First she promised to help, and then she said that she would stay not with him, but somewhere else. He asked where exactly she wanted to go, because she understands how important it is to have a reliable friend nearby who will always support you in difficult times and not just from a distance. There was something odd in Seagrin's voice as he asked the next question. What did she think of him? Fiona glanced at him, realizing that this conversation was becoming more serious than she had expected. However, she did not think long. Calmly, without hesitation, the girl answered that for her he was the most important person in this world. It was true, but the words sounded too simple. Hearing this, Seagrin thought for a moment and then asked, what would she do if he decided to go somewhere else? Would she leave him or do something different? Fiona shrugged and said she wished him luck and just said goodbye. After all, if he was leaving, it was for his reasons, and her job was to respect his choice. But she also added that if he ever needed help, she would come as she promised. No questions asked, no hesitation, just show up and do what needed to be done. Seagrin looked at her in complete shock. He couldn't believe she'd said that so easily. He let out a quiet breath, chuckled, and admitted that it had been stupid to ask her that. Fiona decided to change the subject and said that she was a little cold. She was going to look for something warm, maybe a cape or a blanket to keep warm. Remembering that the maids had washed the blankets and left them somewhere here, she looked around hoping to quickly find something suitable before leaving the room. However, she didn't know the exact place where they were placed. Her gaze darted around the room, but nothing suitable caught her eye, which was starting to irritate her a little. At this time, Seagrin simply stood there and silently looked at her. There was something strange in his gaze, a mixture of longing, sadness, and some kind of internal struggle. And before Fiona could say anything, he came closer and suddenly hugged her from behind. The movement was unexpected, but there was no harshness in it, only warmth. She froze, surprised by his action. It was strange to feel his hands so close, as if he wanted to hold her, not letting her go. She felt trapped but did not resist. Seagrin looked at her with a serious look and said that if she did decide to leave Halon, she should at least stay in the capital. If you think about it, there is nothing surprising about it. In the end, it was always like this. Wherever she was, he would find a way to come for her. Whether it was danger or simply her leaving, he couldn't let her disappear from his life. Of course, it couldn't be any other way. Seagrin had always been like this, stubborn, loyal, ready to follow her, even if it meant giving up everything he had. He had said more than once that if Fiona left, he would try to come to her. He always made such promises, assuring her that he would not allow them to part for real. So now he asked her to wait for him in the capital. It was important for him to know that when he arrived, she would be there close by and not disappear without a trace. There was no doubt about it. He knew he would definitely come. And all he wanted was for her not to go too far and to wait for him in a place where he could find her. Fiona was surprised by this promise, but deep down she had expected something like this from him. Seagrin never changed, always spoke as if his words were law. A couple of months later, she finally moved to the capital. Together with her servants, she unpacked her few belongings, preparing for a new life. In fact, she had few things, just a small bag and a valise. She had never been a person attached to objects and did not like to accumulate unnecessary things. Abel, watching her departure, noticed that many people had come to say goodbye to her, but Seagrin was not among them. His absence seemed especially noticeable. Fiona just smiled at his words and said that it was because he was really upset about her leaving. Then the Duke asked if he had said anything else. She nodded and calmly replied that Seagrin had promised to come for her, and if the protagonist does something he has never done before, it can be a very disturbing omen. The Duke chuckled and remarked that this was all Seagrin. As he left, he handed her a letter and something important that he thought she might find useful. Abel gave Fiona a letter of recommendation that could be useful to her in the future. If she decides to stay in the capital, this document will allow her to live in the Halon mansion. The girl looked at the letter carefully and couldn't help but smile slightly. She already had enough money for the first time, but the offer was generous. However, the Duke doubted that this was their last meeting. As Fiona was about to get into the carriage, she paused for a moment and turned to him. With a slight bow, she thanked him sincerely for all he had done for her. The Duke, hearing her words, only smiled. He seemed pleased with this farewell. Even now, when she was leaving, he looked calm and contented. As soon as Fiona got into the carriage, the servants also began to say goodbye. The maids came closer and said that they would miss their mistress because over the years they had become attached to her. They also asked her to visit them occasionally if she had the opportunity, since the Halon house was always open to her and they would like to see her again. At that moment, the girl noticed that Abel was saying something. His voice was quiet and she did not immediately understand the words, but there was something important in them. He seemed to be wondering if they would ever see each other again. There was no sadness or regret in his voice, but the fact that he asked made her think. Fiona sighed heavily and leaned back, settling herself more comfortably in the carriage. All these goodbyes had tired her out a little, but that was to be. She suddenly felt tired. A new life awaited her, and as the carriage moved smoothly away, she thought it would be nice to rest a little. Jane knew full well that his father's condition was critical. Doctors at the hospital told him that there was almost no chance of recovery, and the family had to prepare for the worst. Despite this, deep down there was a tiny hope that my father would come to his senses. But reality was merciless. His condition was only getting worse with each passing day, and no one could change it. The most disturbing thing was that the deterioration began immediately after his father made his will. It couldn't be a coincidence, and Jane couldn't get the thought out of his head. Now, according to all laws, the eldest son had to decide the fate of the inheritance. He, as the legitimate firstborn and heir of the family, had to take on all responsibility. The eldest son of Count Green-Kindle had no doubts about his right. He firmly decided that he would be the head of the family and did not allow the thought that anyone could challenge his right. Jane, having listened to his self-confident words, only smiled wryly. Then turning to his brother, he coldly noted that Kindle really knew how to persuade, but not him. He wondered if there was really a law that only the eldest son could inherit the title. Or was it all about strength, especially in a family of mages where power belonged to the strongest? Jane was the youngest son of the Earl of Green. Their family had always been famous for their outstanding magicians, and of course the title of head of the family had to go to the one who possessed the most powerful magic. Kindle smirked, his eyes flashing with cold contempt. Did Jane dare to claim that he was stronger than his own brother? What foolish conceit! Kindle didn't think it was even worth discussing. He looked at Jane demandingly and suggested that he demonstrate his abilities right now to dispel all doubts. As far as he was concerned, the little brother could at best light a tiny fire. He had no idea of the real difficulties, and Kindle was sure that he was not worthy of remaining in the house. Their mother heard this entire conversation, but even after her appearance the brothers did not calm down. Kindle declared that it was Jane who was disgracing their family of magicians, and therefore he was the one who should leave. The woman entered the room with a tired but stern look. Her voice was calm but full of hidden anger. If their dispute became known outside the house, it would bring shame on the whole family. As soon as the brothers saw their mother, they tensed up. They didn't know how much she had heard, but it was clear that her patience was wearing thin. She began talking about the way Jane treated her brother. Jane, without hesitation, declared that even with all this, he was still better than the worthless firstborn who would only destroy their family. His voice was full of contempt. The woman was shocked by her son's words. A spark of anger flashed in her eyes. That was enough. She was not going to let them continue this pointless argument. She firmly stated that she would decide the inheritance issue herself, therefore they must stop feuding because her decision will be final, and there is no point in arguing with it. But Jane burned the last bridge. He looked at his mother with cold mockery and said that he did not trust her words. Even if she was their mother, she had no right to decide the fate of the inheritance. The mother froze, not believing her ears, but Jane had already said what he wanted. He knew that everyone in this house was well aware of her secret love affairs, and now it was voiced out loud. The Countess still couldn't understand how Fiona had dared to give this boy so much money. She was worried that their family fortune might end up with him. This was unacceptable to her. Kindle calmly said that no one cared about her connections, but if rumors spread through noble circles, the family's honor would be at risk. He hinted that his mother should be more careful. Suddenly the doors opened and servants came in. The woman froze, expecting to hear bad news. The expression on their faces showed that something serious had happened. The servants bowed and announced that an unexpected guest had arrived. Now the orders of the mistress and her sons were required. The Countess frowned, sensing something was wrong. Her voice trembled when she asked who exactly had come to see them. The servant was clearly nervous, not knowing how best to present this news, but it was impossible to remain silent. He gathered his courage and said the name. Lady Fiona Green, the one who had left home for Halen 5 years ago, had returned. A tense silence fell over the room. No one could believe what they were hearing. It was impossible. They had written her off long ago, to come back after so many years. How could this even happen? The thought that she was alive horrified everyone. Many immediately decided that she was an imposter. The child could not have survived in such terrible conditions. At that time, she was only 13, and the northern battlefield was no place for a child. Besides, everyone knew that she did not possess even the weakest magic. Everyone remembered the story of Fiona Green. The Earl had once brought her to this house, but no one had seen any value in her. The bastard sent to the attic had not bothered anyone. The girl who was sent to her death by her own family, believing it was just a way to carry out the king's orders, no one even tried to protect, and now none of them feel guilty about it. The woman standing in the hall without even looking at her contemptuously ordered the servants to send her away. She was sure that before her stood nothing more than an imposter who did not deserve attention. But before anyone could do anything, Fiona herself walked into the room. She calmly but firmly noted that such a reception from the family was, to put it mildly, rude. One of the servants tried to block her way, reminding her that she couldn't just walk in without an invitation. Fiona replied with a smile that it was indeed difficult, but she managed. When everyone finally looked at her more closely, a tense silence fell over the room. They couldn't help but admit that this girl really did resemble the Duke in her look and manners. Of course, they wanted to believe that it was a lie, but finishing her long journey and returning here to put an end to the past was an important goal for Fiona. She calmly stated that she had received official confirmation of her death, which was sent to her, so the question of her existence clearly needs clarification. These people seemed to hate face-to-face meetings, preferring to resolve everything through letters. They thought they could get rid of her with a few lines on paper. But oddly enough, Fiona prefers to talk face to face. That's why she's here, and she doesn't want to leave until everything that needs to be said has been said. It had been so many years since they had last seen each other, but could this really be called a warm family reunion? Their welcome was far from warm, but Fiona was not surprised. Fiona actually felt happy knowing that nothing had changed in their family. Everything was as she remembered it, the same habits, the same atmosphere, the same views. It gave her a sense of stability that she had been missing lately. Then, remembering those moments, she simply smiled and assured him that she was speaking sincerely. It was true. There was no lie in her words. She did not need to pretend because she truly felt relief. Lying in bed, she felt strange, as if the reality around her had changed, but she couldn't figure out what exactly was wrong. Sleep didn't come, and her thoughts were confused, forcing her to wonder what awaited her next. To put it another way, it wasn't the Duke of Halen's walls that surrounded her. It was her own father's house, the Earl of Green. Even though she'd almost forgotten what it was like to be here, the feeling was too foreign. Now she was given a decent room, which was certainly surprising. Unlike before when she had to endure inconveniences, now she was finally able to get a good night's sleep. Although it was strange, it was pleasant. If they had decided to settle her in the attic as before, she would definitely not have kept silent. She would have raised a fuss, would have made them regret such a decision. Their faces yesterday full of bewilderment were funny. She enjoyed this moment. Fiona noticed that these people seemed to be arguing among themselves before making a decision. Their argument must have been heated, but she found it rather amusing. She felt neither anger nor regret, only a slight smile. She hated being dragged into all this. It would be so much easier to just give up the inheritance, sign the papers, and leave tomorrow. Life outside of all this would be so much calmer without all this unnecessary worry. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by a maid appearing at the door. She politely announced that she had brought water for washing. Fiona looked up surprised. She hadn't even had to ask for it. She allowed him to enter and, still perplexed, thanked the maid for her concern. It was unexpected, but pleasant. It seemed like a small thing, but after everything she had been through, even such attention seemed something new. However, as she reached for the water, she noticed that the maid had placed the container too roughly, and some of the water had spilled out. Fiona frowned. The maids in the Halon household never made such mistakes. She wondered, why was that? It was unusual, even irritating. In the Duke's house, everything was different. Every detail, every gesture of the servants, everything was subject to strict order, and such oversights did not happen. Her frown deepened when she noticed that the jug itself looked dirty, and the water— something was wrong with it. The smell of it made her wince. Where had such a disgusting liquid come from? She carefully brought the jug closer to her and immediately realized that it was water that was used to wash rags. Fiona felt irritation rising in her. What kind of sign was this from the servants? They had actually done it, letting her wash herself with dirty water that was usually used to wash rags. It wasn't just disrespect, it was downright humiliation. Fiona looked at the jug with disgust. How could anyone be so stupid and vile? She couldn't understand. After all, even if they didn't love her, it was still worth maintaining some decency. But it seemed they didn't care, and decided to show their true attitude. Despite everything, she was still a member of this family. She had spent 5 years on the battlefield, lived through terrible times, and after all that they dared to treat her like this, it was not just insulting, it was humiliating. The maid standing in front of her didn't even try to hide her emotions. She simply covered her face with her hand, but Fiona could clearly see that she was laughing right in her face, openly, without the slightest attempt to restrain herself. That voice, that face. Fiona frowned, looking at her carefully. She had definitely seen her before, somewhere, sometime. The memory was vague, but she knew she had met this maid before. She took a deep breath, trying to sort out her thoughts, and suddenly everything clicked into place. Of course. She had seen her 5 years ago. It couldn't be a coincidence. Too many things matched up. It was the same maid who had once mockingly told her that the longer you looked at her, the more obvious her origins became. The words had stuck in Fiona's mind then, and now they echoed in her head. She remembered. This girl was the Countess's lady-in-waiting, And she had always treated Fiona terribly, only because she was illegitimate. The contempt in her gaze, then it seemed, had not disappeared anywhere now. So that's why she was given this room. It wasn't kindness or a random decision. It was all part of something bigger, some plan that had been laid out in advance. They had been in cahoots from the start. It meant that her family had always seen her as nothing more than a worthless bastard. They never changed their minds, but it seemed they had been wrong about one thing. They think she's just a bastard lucky enough to be born with half-noble blood, no power, no money, no real home, and her position is too precarious to be taken seriously as a threat. If this attitude towards her continues, her desire for revenge will flare up with renewed vigor. After all, if you imagine that Fiona was forced to endure this all her life, then she will not be able to simply leave it unanswered. So, without hiding her curiosity, she turned to the maid and asked her name. She, without hesitation, gave her name with obvious pride, as if she wanted to prove something. But Fiona frowned. Her face seemed familiar. She had seen her before. The maid, noticing this, suddenly smiled, as if there was an understanding in her gaze that Fiona did not share. Besides, this maid looked her straight in the eyes. This was unusual because in noble families, servants were not supposed to behave so insolently. They should lower their gaze, showing respect. Even her behavior was too casual, as if she didn't take Fiona seriously at all. Perhaps she was confident in the Countess's favor, so she acted like that, reflecting her attitude. Fiona had always known that the Countess hated her. Now that the inheritance was at stake, that hatred was probably even stronger. She would do anything to leave her with nothing. Perhaps the Countess will take absolutely everything, leaving the bastard without a penny. Now, not only she herself is worried, but the entire Green family, because the question of inheritance has become a real headache for them. However, Fiona's reaction was too calm, even boring. The maid could not believe that this stupid girl did not understand how she was being humiliated. She clearly expected a different reaction from her. So she decided to tell him everything straight. The Countess wanted her thrown out of the house, humiliated and crying pitifully. Let her understand that she had no chance of staying here. Fiona Green? At best, she's just a naive girl who probably hopes that now that she's back, she can be part of the family again. But that's not going to happen. To them, she is nothing, a bastard unworthy of attention. For this maid, she is just a way to earn the Countess's trust. And if she can show that Fiona has no place in this house, then her own position will only become stronger. Fiona looked at the maid and calmly stated that she understood her plan perfectly. It became clear to her that the maid had decided to play her little game, but had miscalculated. The mistress was not as naive as it might seem. However, May didn't even flinch, only asked with a laugh and obvious contempt what the lady was talking about. Her voice sounded defiant, as if she was confident in her rightness and was not afraid of possible consequences. Fiona slowly closed her eyes as if trying to hide her emotions. No one could tell what she was thinking at that moment, but her posture and the tense expression on her face made the maid wonder, how long was she going to cry? But in her heart, Fiona had no intention of giving in to weakness. She didn't even want to admit the thought that she still considered herself the aristocrat she once was, but the situation forced her to play this role. She continued to pretend that she was depressed and ready to burst into tears at any moment. Her trembling lips, her downcast gaze, everything indicated that she was worried, but in reality, it was just a distraction. And suddenly, sharply, before the maid could even comprehend what was happening, her palm slapped May's face with all its force. A loud slap echoed through the room, breaking the tense silence. The blow was so unexpected that the maid froze in place. She stood there not believing what was happening, looking at Fiona with wide eyes. She certainly could not have predicted this. It was beyond her understanding. After all, standing in front of her was Fiona, the girl who had always been so docile, who had spent her entire life afraid to disobey because she knew that if she did, she would be locked in the attic. And now she had slapped her? Fiona calmly reminded him that she had already said yesterday she was really glad that her family had not changed. But the maid suddenly screamed, losing her composure, and angrily asked what she was even allowing herself to do. However, Fiona did not answer right away. She looked straight into the maid's eyes and calmly, even with some mockery, asked, "Do you even understand what exactly you did wrong?" It was strange. There was no anger in her voice, no resentment in her eyes. On the contrary, Fiona was smiling as if this very moment had given her genuine pleasure. May was perplexed as she watched the maid literally suffocate with fear. Her hands were shaking, her gaze darting around the room as if she was looking for a way to escape. But what could have scared her so much? Suddenly, the maid exploded, her face twisted in anger. She almost screamed that Fiona should be afraid of her, not the other way around. There was not only rage in her voice, but also some kind of desperate attempt to maintain power. She immediately declared that she would go to the Countess immediately. It seemed that the thought of this gave her confidence. There was a threat in her tone. Apparently, she believed that the hostess would certainly stand up for her. But Fiona didn't even let her finish. Her hand shot up again, and another blow landed on the maid's face. This flash of determination was too unexpected for her to react. Fiona made it clear that she had asked a question, and now the maid simply had to answer. Her voice was firm, and her eyes were piercing. Something was clearly wrong with her, and the maid had to explain it. May felt completely lost. She didn't know what to do, what to say, or whose side to take. This was going beyond a normal conflict. The situation was becoming increasingly tense. The maid looked like she was living the worst nightmare of her life. She did not understand how her mistress could behave so cruelly, and this made her even more scared. Who was this person in front of her? Fiona ordered her to answer immediately and tell her exactly what she had done wrong. There was no patience in her voice, only demand. She wanted the truth, and she was not going to delay. If the maid did not give her a worthy answer, then Fiona would gladly tell her how it was customary to act in the house of Halun. There they did not stand on ceremony with guilty maids, and perhaps it was worth reminding her of this. In Halun, servants could have their tongues cut out for mocking their masters. The punishment was cruel but effective. Fiona wondered what methods they used in the capital, surely not as severe but still tough enough. She looked at the maid and thought, if she was stubbornly silent, perhaps she should use the Halun methods. Fiona knew it was just a thought, but she still wondered how the girl would react. As soon as she spoke about it out loud, May immediately turned pale, began to tremble, and unable to contain her emotions, burst into tears. She quickly began to ask for forgiveness, and Fiona, crossing her arms over her chest, asked who she was. Through her tears, the maid replied that she was Lady Fiona, the Earl of Green's daughter. Her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly as if she hoped that the correct answer would help her avoid punishment. Fiona nodded as if assessing what she had heard and asked another question. What exactly should a maid do? But May, having lost her answer, began to repeat that she would not behave so arrogantly anymore and begged him to forgive her. Finally, Fiona said that she could go now. Her gaze was cold, but her tone was even. The maid froze thinking about this and apparently decided that her mistress had finally calmed down and was letting her go. But as soon as she took a step back, her thoughts changed. She needed to hurry and tell the Countess everything. If she managed to warn her first, she might get protection. The Countess would certainly not ignore this. She would definitely take revenge for her, and then Fiona would have to regret what she had done. May was sure of that. As soon as she made an attempt to escape, Fiona turned to her and asked with a grin where she was going in such a hurry. The maid shuddered and froze, realizing that she would not be able to leave so easily. Fiona calmly reminded her that the first thing the maid had to do was take care of that basin of dirty water. After all, that was where it all started. So let her correct her own mistakes. Then, looking straight into the maid's frightened eyes, she added that she must remember, if she dared to do something like that again, the punishment would be much more severe. Next time she would not get off with a simple fright. Fiona hoped May understood. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but she needed to show that she couldn't be treated as the servants wanted. However, the last thing the maid expected happened the next moment. Fiona grabbed the basin and without blinking an eye poured the dirty water right on her. The horror that gripped May was genuine. Fiona felt anger flare up inside her. She remembered Seagrin once saying that she was easily angered, and now she knew he was right. These people knew how to hit a nerve. Seagrin, as it turned out, was right. She thought she had a way with herself, but when faced with such an attitude, her patience began to crack at the seams. She always thought she was pretty calm, but she seemed to have overestimated herself. It might have been different if she hadn't had to deal with this kind of attitude all the time. They provoke her themselves. These people hadn't changed at all. The same cold looks, the same arrogance. They were still horrible, and this realization only made her more irritated. Why should she put up with this? Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her and turned around. Countess Green was standing there looking at her suspiciously. Her voice was venomous as she asked what Fiona was doing there. Fiona lifted her chin slightly. After all, she was in her own home. Was it a crime to walk where she once lived? She had nothing to justify to this woman. But the Countess did not calm down. She slowly tilted her head to one side, as if looking at something funny, and asked again if Fiona really considered this place her home. There was mockery in her voice. The Countess noticed that Fiona still looked at everything through rose-colored glasses, as if she were living in an illusion. Her words were full of venom, but Fiona was not going to swallow it. Everything inside was boiling. The desire to hit her was growing with every second. But the Countess did not stop. She continued throwing in that Fiona should get rid of her illusions and get lost. She was no longer a pathetic rat clinging to the remains. Fiona always considered herself well-mannered and educated, and knew how to restrain her emotions when necessary. But even she had her limits, especially when she was insulted to her face. Perhaps she should have remained calm, but if you think about it, does she owe anyone anything? No. If these people are so sure of themselves, then let them see that she will not silently tolerate their antics. The Countess had started this argument, had dragged her into it, and now Fiona thought she'd had enough. She wasn't going to play her games or tolerate her manipulations any longer. Nothing that was said mattered anymore. If you have to fight, you have to fight. That was the Halon principle. He did not accept cowardly running away, and Fiona understood that sometimes the best way was to move forward, not to hide, but now she was not sure if it was worth it. However, if she decided to openly oppose the Countess, it would mean that she would have to stay here longer than she wanted, and she still had so much to do, so many decisions to make. Everything needed to be thought through. After weighing everything, Fiona decided to let it go. There was no point in clinging to the past when the decision had already been made. She knew what she wanted, and the Countess no longer had power over her. The past was behind her, and she was no longer looking back. But unexpectedly for herself, she turned to the Countess and thanked her. These words were said calmly, without mockery, but with obvious firmness. The Countess could not understand what the catch was, and looked at her with suspicion. The woman was confused about what they were talking about, but Fiona explained, thanks to everything the Countess had done, she finally realized what she really wanted. And it wasn't revenge, not anger, but an opportunity to do something truly important. The Countess looked at her with undisguised contempt. She curled her lips and frowned, asking what exactly she was talking about. There was displeasure in her voice, as if she knew she couldn't control the situation. Fiona looked at her calmly and said firmly that she wanted no connection with her or the Green family. It was her final choice. She refused to be part of this world that had oppressed her for so long. She knew she was doing the right thing. She would formally renounce her inheritance and request that the Green family registry be amended. From now on, she would have a different name, a different life. Everything that connected her to this place would be in the past. The Countess's maid received her orders. Her abrupt movements suggested that she already knew what her mistress would do. Fiona saw this and understood that the Countess was not going to let her go without consequences. Looking straight at the Countess, she declared that she would not take a penny from them, no inheritance, no gifts, no slightest benefit. She wanted nothing from them. This money had never belonged to her, and she would not allow it to become her chains. So the Countess has nothing to worry about, but if someone tries to take over what is rightfully hers, she will not allow it. Even if she does not need the inheritance, it does not mean that someone else will be able to use it. Fiona hoped that greed would tear them apart from within, let them feel what others felt because of them. If she left, they would fight among themselves for what was left, and that would be her best revenge. The Countess couldn't tell if Fiona was laughing sincerely or if it was just her way of hiding her true feelings. Only when a person loses everything does he realize how little he really had and sink into despair. Fiona had said outright that she was leaving everything and moving away. She didn't want to cling to the past or get caught up in her family's games. Her decision was final, and she wasn't going to back down from it. That same day she sat down to write a letter. It was short without unnecessary words, just a simple request, no unnecessary warmth or friendliness. She wrote not as a friend, but as someone who needed to solve a problem. The letter said that she wanted the money for the mansion that the Duke had mentioned earlier immediately. She was not asking, but rather notifying, making it clear that she had already decided everything. Abel received the letter earlier than he expected. He didn't even think that Fiona would accept it so quickly. Her determination was surprising, but at the same time there was nothing unexpected about it. She always acted decisively. He knew Fiona had a soft spot. Every person has one. She just hid hers carefully, not letting anyone get to it, but he felt that even she had something that made her doubt. To be honest, he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. And yet, when it finally arrived, he felt a strange feeling. Not relief, not joy. Something else that he couldn't quite explain. Fiona Green had been strange since she was a child. She always acted soft, sweet, like she was the kindest child. Everyone around her was used to this image, but he knew that there was something else hidden behind it, because sometimes she became completely different. Cold, hard, distant. At such moments it was impossible to understand her. It seemed that in front of you there were two different people existing in one body. All this time she had been protecting Hailon. He thought it had become important to her that she had come to value this land. Perhaps she had even grown so accustomed to this place that she could no longer see herself outside it. But when he told her to leave, she did it without the slightest hesitation. No arguments, no attempts to prove anything. Just one moment, and she was gone, as if everything that had happened had no meaning to her. And that made him feel a little sad. He didn't even expect to feel that way. It seemed like he knew it would happen, but there was still a strange, lingering feeling inside. So it's no surprise that it came as a shock to Seagrin. He couldn't just accept it. It was too abrupt, too unexpected, and he didn't know how to deal with it. After all, Fiona had protected Hailon for 5 years, guarded it like it was herself. And now she was just gone. Like it didn't matter. Like it was all a mistake, and that was hard to come to terms with. Fiona had heard rumors, some of which concerned her. People said she might be in love with Seagrin. It was funny because she had even left him in that place without looking back. So by her actions, she seemed to be telling everyone around her, her work here is finished. She had done all she could, and now she saw no point in lingering or looking back. Since childhood, Fiona tried to stay away from this society. She was not interested in its rules and relationships between people. She always lived as if she did not care. But even if she wanted to understand their rules to find out the reason for the actions of those around her, it would be too difficult. Some things were simply inexplicable and therefore not worth wasting time on. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Abel raised his head immediately, guessing who it could be. He was not mistaken. It was Seagrin standing at the door. The Duke allowed him in, not even surprised. Fiona noticed that Seagrin was a little late. It wasn't a big deal, but she always noticed details like that. Perhaps it was a habit from the days when she relied more on observation than words. Seagrin calmly said that he had arrived as soon as he had been called, although he himself did not understand why he had been called. The Duke merely chuckled, asking why he should not get used to behaving like this in the future. He had just said it with an air of having a complaint of his own. He seemed a little hurt that Fiona hadn't mentioned him in her letter, but Seagrin simply remarked calmly that he hadn't expected anything different from the start. He had never had any particular illusions, so such things couldn't upset him. Besides, it didn't matter now. It was all decided and he was going to her. The rest didn't matter because he had a much more important journey ahead of him. The Duke didn't object. All he could do was watch the boy make his own decisions. After all, no one could make him change his mind. However, Abel could not help but remind him that his relations with the imperial family left much to be desired. Moreover, they knew very well who he really was and what he could become. He remembered how he had told him this several years ago, and now he simply repeated his words. Seagrin did not deny it, but merely nodded, confirming that it was indeed so. Then the Duke asked him a question. What would he feel if he were officially recognized as a prince? This was not just idle talk, but something much more serious. But the boy didn't answer. His silence said more than any words. Abel noticed this and just nodded as if he understood what he was thinking. The thing was that Seagrin had been hesitating for a long time between the thirst for revenge, the desire to live, and the desire for peace. But recently, he finally made a decision for himself. However, if he wants to return to the capital, he needs to achieve something significant. Without a compelling reason, his return would be useless and even dangerous. He is only a commoner connected to the imperial family, but his position can change. If Highland stands behind him, even those who do not notice him now will begin to see his power and influence. Everything will change if he achieves recognition, something so significant that the capital cannot ignore it. He must make a move that will establish him as Prince Seagrin, a man worthy of the legacy. For example, the story of how he defeated the leader of the monsters and saved many people in the barren lands of Hylon, a legend that could change the opinions of others and make his name known everywhere. If he is ready, the Duke will set the perfect stage for him, prepare the conditions where he can prove himself. Everything will be organized so that this step will become his triumph and not another failure. If he really wants to become a prince again, to return to his city and find his place, he must survive. And not just survive, become a hero at least once in his life to prove his worth. Fiona decided to write a letter to Abel. She was going to tell him that she would accept the money he was willing to spend on the mansion. After all, she couldn't do without it. However, as a condition, he demanded that when the work was completed, she would go and inspect the Hylon mansion for him. It seemed an odd request, but not a very difficult one. It was a good thing he didn't ask for something more insane like calling her father. That was something Fiona would never have been able to live with. She certainly wouldn't have accepted that deal. Even though Abel liked her, it didn't change the fact. In the book, he was her enemy, and his behavior couldn't make her think otherwise. He was still the same person who didn't inspire confidence. But now in reality, he was saying something completely different. He was saying that he wanted her to be his daughter. It sounded too absurd, too unrealistic to just believe. When all this was over, she would really need a rest. There was so much going on that she didn't even realize how tired she was. If only she could finish the job as soon as possible. However, now the moment had come when everything had to go its course. The story she knew had to finally unfold because the time of Abel and Seagrin's approach to the capital was already close. According to the plot, Seagrin was supposed to kill the northern cursed dragon, after which his name would become famous. He would become a hero and then return to the capital where he would be greeted with honors. The imperial family, succumbing to the influence of public opinion, recognizes him as a prince because his feat will be too significant to ignore. And soon the main character Eunice will appear on the stage. Fiona was curious to see how it would all play out. She was even excited by the anticipation, even though she knew that for now all she could do was wait and see. After all, Seagrin had always depended on her. Fiona couldn't help but worry about how the story would develop further when everything went beyond her previous knowledge. Seagrin had always been himself, a man who knew how to use the weaknesses of others to his advantage. And now Fiona should not think about him, but about how to play on the weaknesses of her family. After all, it was possible that the Greens would start their machinations as soon as they felt threatened. Their entire fortune was built on dirty money on the opium trade, and she knew it very well. In the Empire, any mention of opium meant big trouble. It was prohibited by law, and such things were punished harshly without hesitation. If the Green family is proven to have any involvement in this, all of their property, all of their ill-gotten wealth will be immediately confiscated with no way to get it back. And those who were directly involved in these dirty deals would face severe punishment. And of course, the Green family members would be punished first because their guilt would be irrefutable. However, Fiona began to notice that Jane and the Earl's wife seemed to have no idea that their family was connected to anything like this. They lived in their own world, unaware of what lay behind their luxury. This made her think, what should she do now? Should she escalate the situation knowing that some family members were innocent, or should she use this chance to her advantage? After all, why not try to corner them? Since fate had given her such an opportunity, she needed to figure out how to get the most out of it. When Jane saw Fiona, his face expressed genuine shock. He clearly did not expect her to appear and did not understand at all what she was doing there and why she came. Fiona looked calmly at her brother and, without losing confidence, said that she had something important that he should know. After all, he was the heir to the family. The guy frowned. He wasn't going to listen to her moralizing and stated directly that she had no right to interfere in family matters that didn't concern her. However, she just continued to look at him with a firm gaze. It was important for her to say this, because he would be the one to inherit the title, which meant that he would be the one to answer for everything that happened in their family. The boy was a little surprised to hear her words. He hadn't expected Fiona to say it so directly without any hesitation. It seemed she had no doubt that it was the magical power that would determine who would become the heir. Fiona stated firmly that the Green family had always been known as a line of mages, and so it was logical that the strongest should be at the head. She spoke calmly, but there was a certainty in her voice. For her, this was an obvious fact, but the reality was different. Kindle became the heir only because he was born first, not because of strength, not because of intelligence, but simply because of seniority. If things had been decided differently, would he have had any right to this place at all? Besides, Jane had serious problems. As the Duke of Halen had said, he was deeply in debt. This was due to his recklessness and weakness for gambling. He lost more than he could afford. And now that the sum had become truly enormous, he was ready to do anything to get his hands on the family fortune. Only money could save him from disaster, and for its sake he was ready to cross any boundaries. The truth was, though, that the debt had already been paid. Before leaving Halen, someone had taken up the matter and settled it, but it remained a mystery. No one knew who had solved Jane's problem or why. Fiona confidently stated that he should agree with her words. The guy thought about it, but did not find any mistake in them. She spoke the truth, and it was obvious. It was unfair that the family turned a blind eye to the weakness of the heir. Kindle wasn't talented. The whole situation seemed ridiculous. How could a man without talent become the head? But there were enough problems without that now. Besides, he probably didn't even realize that he had inherited the title long ago. Fiona suddenly looked at him seriously and said that she had found something in his room. Her voice sounded wary, and the guy immediately realized that she was talking about something important, perhaps even dangerous. She asked him if he knew what it was. The boy looked at the object in her hands and reluctantly answered, "It was opium." A simple but disturbing truth. This morning, the servants found him in the heir's room. It was an unexpected discovery that instantly changed many things in their understanding of the situation. And now, the sister was forced to say out loud what everyone had suspected but had not dared to voice. The heir to their family was addicted to opium. Now that she said it out loud, it was obvious that if she had such important information, it would be much easier to solve the problem. Perhaps without her words, the situation would have dragged on, but now everything was in her hands. However, the guy was in no hurry to rejoice. He immediately asked who exactly found the opium in this room. This was an important moment, and he could not miss it. He needed to know who to trust. Fiona calmly replied that she was ready to tell everything she knew. But before that, she had one condition. She couldn't just give out the information. She needed to ask for something in return. If he inherited the title, she wanted him to correct her status. This was the only chance to change her situation. She was not going to miss this opportunity and retreat. He was clearly surprised by her words, so much so that he even asked again if he had understood her correctly. It seemed strange to him that she suddenly started talking about this right now at such a moment. He added that she understood perfectly well that she could harm herself by doing so. Such a demand could not but have consequences, and he could not help but warn her about it. But Fiona just firmly replied that she came back here for this very reason. Everyone mistakenly believes that she wants to steal the family fortune, but that is not true at all. Her goals were completely different. She just wanted to see her family again, but instead, she found herself in the position of a bastard judged by everyone. Even those she considered family no longer understood her, and she was tired of it. Moreover, her presence only created unnecessary inconvenience for the family. She felt it at every step, and it only hurt more. Her existence became a problem for everyone. After everything that had happened, Fiona had no better way out than to cry. Luckily, she was a talented actress and her tears looked completely sincere. She knew when and how to play the right emotions. Through her sobs, she said that her heart was breaking with pain because she loved her family with all her soul. No matter how hard it was, she couldn't just forget about them. There was real sadness in her voice. These words had an effect. The guy looked at her carefully and firmly declared that he understood her. If he ever became the head of the family, he would help her gain freedom. This promise sounded serious to him. Fiona was pleased, though she didn't quite understand what he meant. She had already been sent to the battlefield. Hadn't that been their decision? So why was he talking about freedom now? It was all confusing. Then he suddenly asked a question. What was the name of the servant who found the opium in her older brother's room? Fiona smiled faintly because the whole story about the found opium was a lie from the very beginning. In fact, it was she who had orchestrated the whole thing. She had bribed several servants and asked them to let her inspect Kindle's room. It was supposed to look like someone had accidentally discovered a prohibited substance. One of the men she had bribed on her instructions told Jane that he had accidentally stumbled upon opium while cleaning. Everything was so cleverly arranged that no one could doubt the veracity of what had happened. As a result, they became unwitting witnesses to her cunning game. Now everyone was sure that Lady Fiona had revealed the truth completely by accident. She simply continued to watch what was happening without interfering. She was interested in watching how events were developing. Intervention would be unnecessary now, so she decided to just watch everything was going exactly as she expected, which meant that her plan had not failed yet. Kindle could not restrain himself and attacked his brother in rage, declaring that he had no right to power. He was too hot-tempered, and this only proved his weakness in the eyes of others. Jane shouted back that a man with Kindle's meager abilities had no chance. He had no place in government, and he wouldn't let him even think about it. Their argument grew more and more heated. They were yelling at each other again, and it wasn't surprising anymore. These two were always arguing, so their squabbles seemed quite normal. Fiona had expected something like this, and it even amused her. As she had expected, the tension in their conversation only grew. It reached such a point that the Count's wife simply stopped showing up. She was tired of these endless showdowns. As Jane continued to spread rumors exaggerating Kindle's guilt, they spread with incredible speed. People who heard his words believed every word, which immediately affected Kindle's reputation. Relatives began to question Kindle's worth, which made his situation worse. His name was tarnished, and now they wondered whether it was worth keeping him in the family. In the end, despite his attempts to justify himself, Kindle was expelled from his family. He was tied up and simply deported, leaving him no chance of returning. It was a cruel and final decision. And so ended this stormy family war in which there were no winners. The entire burden of the conflict fell on Kindle's shoulders, while the others seemed to calmly continue their lives. Now it was her turn. Fiona knew it was her turn, and she was ready to act. This was her crucial part of the game, and she wasn't going to back down no matter how hard it was. She had come into possession of important documents that revealed the Green family's illegal trade. She decided to send them to the Imperial Palace, where they could play a decisive role in her fate. Now everything depended on her move. In the game of Jenga, she was playing with fate. She was going to completely destroy the wooden tower. There was no turning back. Her decision would change everything around her. Fiona had just received one letter from the Duke, and now, to her surprise, another had arrived. She couldn't understand why he wrote so often without giving her time to respond. It was all starting to make her nervous. In a new letter, the Duke asked if she had finished her work. His words sounded as if he had been waiting for her to finish the job from the very beginning. This irritated her as she could not understand his impatience. Fiona got angry at the question. She didn't understand if he really thought it was that easy to destroy someone's family. It wasn't just a matter or a decision, it was about a lifetime and many destinies. Today, unexpectedly for everyone, the Empire's financial department received an anonymous letter. This letter was full of accusations against the Green family, accusing them of illegal business activities. Fiona immediately realized that this was serious. If the allegations in the letter were true, all of the Green family's property would be confiscated. These consequences seemed dire, and Fiona felt a sense of dread for the future. Everything depended on what would happen next. The Green family was quite influential, and its wealth was not small. The imperial palace could decide that this was a great opportunity to replenish the treasury. All these dangers now threatened not only her, but the entire family. 2 days later, Fiona approached Jane, congratulating him on his new status as head of the family. It was a momentous occasion, although Fiona was well aware that despite his position, all the responsibility rested on his shoulders. Jane noted in a measured tone that this status was only temporary. There was no joy or satisfaction in his words. He was too focused on the problems at hand to see it as an achievement. She told him that despite everything, there really was no one who could take his place. No one could be at his best except him. Although she knew that the position was actually burdensome, Jane confirmed her words, agreeing that this was true. After all, he accepted the documents she had prepared and was prepared to sign them. It was a step forward, but the situation remained tense. She pulled out the documents she had mentioned earlier and offered to stamp them for him. This was the final step to finalize the registration, and if everything was done correctly, the process would finally be complete. Jane took the documents and put his seal on them without hesitation. He felt neither pride nor joy. It was simply a necessary action in the circumstances they found themselves in. Everything was going according to plan. "Now you can get out?" he said, leaning back wearily in his chair. He needed to concentrate on his work because there was so much to do that he could barely keep up with everything. She had just finished an important task. Yes, the job did seem like a mountain of tasks. Jane was surrounded by piles of papers and tasks that needed attention, but all this was a consequence of his new position, and he knew that this was not the end. However, Fiona said that she had something she wanted to tell him. Her words were full of tension, because what she was going to say could come as a surprise to him, even a shock. She noticed that she had never gotten an answer from him to her question about his gambling addiction. This question was important to her, and she had long wanted him to admit his problem, but her words made him nervous. Besides, he had a debt that she knew about. It was no secret to her, and she had no intention of hiding it. Her directness made him feel uncomfortable. He hadn't expected her to talk about it. Jane was dumbfounded. He didn't understand how she knew about his problems. He always thought he was hiding it from everyone, and his concern about it was growing stronger when she said those words. Fiona just shook her head, bidding him farewell. She wasn't going to waste any more time on idle talk, and her decision had been made. She left the room, leaving him alone with his thoughts and responsibilities. As she was leaving, he shouted, but she didn't pay attention. She just went on her way as if nothing had happened, with a light step, as if none of this concerned her. She didn't think she would feel so good. In the corridor, she met the Countess, who was standing with her maid and shouting at her with questions about why she was still there. She is shameless and shouldn't even think about using her brother, but rather she should just disappear.